this time, Councilmember Roger Frey is not here. Councilmember Jennifer Groen.
Here.
Councilmember David Lee is also not in attendance. Councilmember Alex Marcos.
Present.
Councilmember Sherry Wen.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Jessica Rossman.
Here.
And Mayor Cynthia Adkins.
Here. So we'll move into executive session. The matter will be discussed under RCW 42.30.1101I. Everyone, please turn off your mics. Okay, microphones on, please. Thank you, everyone, for coming. We call to order the Medina City Council meeting on June 11th, 2018. Amy, would you please call roll call?
Councilmember Roger Frey.
Here.
Councilmember Jennifer Groen.
Here.
Councilmember David Lee.
Here.
Councilmember Alex Marcos.
Here.
Councilmember Sherry Wen.
Here.
Deputy Mayor Jessica Rossman.
Here.
And Mayor Cynthia Adkins.
Here. Okay, are there any changes to the agenda? If there's no objection, I'd like to move that 5.8 be moved to 7.2. 5.8 is the Park Board rule change, which creates an emeritus position. There's a typo that we need to correct, so I'm suggesting that we move that to 7.2 so we can have a discussion and then adopt it as amended. Any objections? Okay, the agenda.
I just have a little correction on the draft minutes. We don't have to pull it out, but when we get to the consent agenda, I'll make a suggestion.
Okay, thank you, Alex.
Okay.
Anything else? Okay, with those changes, the agenda is approved. We'll move into public comment period. If there's public comment for the public hearing tonight, we'll take that at that time. Are there any public comments that isn't on the public hearing? Okay, seeing none, we'll close that public comment period, and we'll move into presentations. Mr. Sauerwein, the first presentation is the street and sidewalk inventory presentation. Is that Mr. Osada?
Yeah.
Thank you. Hi, Roger.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. My name is Roger Kirkendall with Grant Osborne Engineers, and we have been tasked with preparing the sidewalk evaluation study for the city. Part of our scope is to do an inventory of all your pedestrian pathways in the city and to do mapping, and then to identify some generic costs and prepare a letter report. And tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about the inventory and the mapping. So what you have on the screen is a map that we've prepared that shows the entire city, and on it, at the bottom, there's a legend that talks about whether it's concrete sidewalk, a gravel pathway, a paved shoulder, or a paved walkway. Basically, you have about 35,000 feet of concrete sidewalk, about 14,000 feet of paved asphalt shoulders, although some of those are very narrow and probably would not be comfortable for pedestrians. 4,000 feet of gravel trail and about 1,200 feet of paved trail, which does not include the State Route 520 trail. You've got about 70 intersections, and that does include a few mid-block crossings. That's where a crosswalk crosses the street at somewhere other than an intersection. About 55 of those intersections are served by some type of a walkway, and therefore you would need appropriate ADA ramps in order to make those transitions. About 15 don't have any walkways at all. Throughout the city, most of the driveways that meet or are crossed by a sidewalk or pathway are not ADA compliant. There's about 100 ramps that are identified in the city. About 70 of those are non-compliant. And there's a few locations where there are no ramps at all, where there probably should be ramps. So basically, at this point, we've just made an inventory, and we are in the process of identifying the specifics of which ramps are compliant, which ones are, and taking a further look at sidewalks to see if they need to be widened because they're too narrow or because they're damaged, or maybe there's root upheaval in them where they become a tripping hazard or things like that. And we will have that for you soon, where then we can talk about some other issues as far as what's presented in the report and projects that you might want to move forward with. Are there any just general questions about the sidewalk study?
When you say you'll have a report on the state of the sidewalks, which is really what we were looking for, and you say soon, when is soon?
Probably the next council meeting. If not, it would certainly be the one after that. But we're prepared. We're well on our way into it.
Any other questions?
Does the report include recommendations about some of these ramps that are not compliant, or what are we looking at getting from you?
I think the goal of the report is to provide the council with a rough cost estimate and the amount of work in order to bring your sidewalks up to ADA compliance, but also to add sidewalks or ramps where ones don't exist.
That wasn't the intention of this. The intention was to figure out where we have sidewalks that are raised, tripping hazard, et cetera, and to get an estimate to fix that, not to go the ADA route.
That's something he's gonna work on in the next couple of months. I mean, that takes a little bit more time. We didn't even have inventory at this point. So this is step one. Just get our inventory, where we're non-compliant, and then we'll go around and look at the areas that are damaged.
But that was our number one priority, to get the areas that are damaged to fix
But
them,
we
not
still
ADA.
need, we still need an inventory first before
Right.
we start on that.
Right, which we've been asking for, so
But
thank
we
you.
are planning on moving forward with a sidewalk repair project this year.
Yeah, as a separate project, Ryan's instructed me to prepare a scope of work to bid approximately $200,000 worth of sidewalk improvements. And there's a few areas that we can look at. The area that we've kind of zeroed in on is around the Medina Elementary area, the 10th Street, 8th Street area down there, and work our way out from the school. There are some elements of the walkways there that don't need to be replaced. There are other elements that do. Other potential candidates would be 84th Avenue, south of 12th Street. The city has a TIB grant to do a pavement overlay on that next year, so that will be included in next year's projects. The north end of 84th is currently under construction, so we don't need to address that. Evergreen Point Road has its own study that's underway. 24th Street is a larger project because I think that's a collector in the city, and there may be some additional improvements other than just walkway improvements on that. So we're deferring that one. And then 12th Street, we have a grant application out currently that's under review by the funding agencies for that project. So that's kind of why we zeroed in on Medina Elementary, because it's relatively flat area, meaning that it's a little bit easier to do the design. Therefore, it can be done a little bit quicker, and we can get something constructed this year.
And I do think part of the concern from council was safety. So we were,
And not just at Medina Elementary. I mean, there's long neglected sidewalks in our community that are north of South End, which is where we should stop.
Well,
Make sure the mic are on. I don't know if they...
so
well,
as you
is there
move,
a specific area that would you like us to focus on?
I think as you continue to refine this, I think what I heard the council wanting was from a risk assessment, please help us understand where the most dangerous areas are with respect to both the school children, but with respect to everybody. If there's trip hazards, I do myself think that ADA is important because I think that our sidewalks should be accessible, and I know we have some areas where they're not. So that's that sort of survey that you're undertaking now, and then if you can help us just prioritize where you think we should hit first.
Sure.
I think that's something we've been talking about for a while.
Roger and I discussed that. We're not going to remove
I'm not looking to solve for it. What I'm saying is that we've been talking about it now for a number of months, and we seem to be going down a path of ADA, which, of course is good, but seem to be neglecting the fact that we have a lot of sidewalks in this community that could really stand to be repaired in some form or another to eliminate trip hazards and other things for all residents and not just school students.
I think the
Because
focus,
there's more than school students at Medina Elementary. We have 2 other schools.
right, so if we focus on this ADA upgrade, it would also, at the same time, have contact committee regarding the CIA.
But that's like a year away, right?
No, that's this year, we're planning,
There's some work that we can get done this year.
Okay.
we had 200,000 in the budget for this year to do sidewalks.
Okay.
They are Safe to School grant, because right now we are strict for cash, and I recommend you look at around the schools and to do a nice pavement for the kids to go to school. So the state and the federal both have a Safe to School grant, so we should look into it and so make it really nice walkways for the kids.
Yeah,
Well,
that's an option.
Yeah, my point is that we have Bellevue Christian, and we have sidewalks around there that are used by children every day, and
Yeah.
they are trip
So we should,
hazards.
all of them around the school we can look
Right.
at, to look for the grant to
Right.
share the cost.
Right. It shouldn't just be all Medina Elementary every day.
Well, that's just one area that $200,000 doesn't get you a lot, so we have to pick an area to work on. If you spread the work out throughout the city, it becomes much more inefficient for the contractor. So if there's a different area you want me to focus on, I can focus on that.
The original ask was to do a quick fix of the the sidewalks in our community that pose risks that haven't been fixed in years. Mm-hmm. What I remember talking about at retreat was getting an inventory of sidewalks in general and the overall safety, which would include trip hazards, but would also include places where we may be in a little bit of trouble because we're not providing a safe walking path. Right, like Evergreen Point Road.
But I think that would be his job, would be to look at and see where those highest risk areas are, not limited to trip hazards, but also where are we funneling people, whether they are children or adults, onto streets that don't have a sidewalk but should, or have a shoulder that we have people walk on, but it's not leveled, or it's not wide enough, or, so I did think our mandate was a little broader, I guess.
It is, but we also had talked about like solving for some of the issues more quickly while we do a broader, if we're going to start going down the ADA path, which, makes sense, or wait for Walkable Medina, again, we'll be sitting here in 4 years having the same conversation.
So what if we get an inventory and then we start with fixing the trip hazards while we decide? Unless there's some other
So-
red flags that we
So I think during the council retreat, we did ask for a more broad survey. And it sounds like from step 1, we've now got a survey of what we have. Did I hear you correctly that step 2 is you're going to go and now do an analysis of the dangerous areas, and then you're going to make a recommendation to us on what we should address first?
Yeah, that'll be part of the report.
Okay.
I wrote down in February that Ryan was going to return with assessment of the worst sidewalks and prioritize the repairs. And that was going to be for April, May. And so now we're broadening it, even though that's what we kept talking about. So I'm fine with broadening it as long as we address, some of the immediate issues that we have with sidewalks.
Okay, are there clarifications?
So later
For
in
instructions?
the meeting, we are discussing the 6-year CIP. And you have about 7, 8 items just for sidewalk repair. How is that related to work that's going to be done now versus the study from Roger? So Roger is a study, and your list is something to be done now. The first one on the list is Evergreen Point Road sidewalk, and that's $200,000 by itself. So, and you said we have only a $200,000 total.
that one from
So when we discuss CIP later on, we can discuss those in detail that Jen is raising now?
If you notice, a lot of them are ADA, sidewalk ADA.
There is a lot of ADA, right? But there is Evergreen Point, which we have been discussing not for months, but for years, since I've been in council.
Right.
And it would be nice to see something happening for that as well.
Anyone else on council want to give further instructions or have questions about next steps? Okay, well, thanks for putting together the survey.
Yes, I'm done with that. I think Ryan said that there were some questions regarding the Medina Park South Bridge that I was prepared to speak to.
You had asked last month about the cost. It went from around, initially it started with a footbridge, which we're going to replace in top. We went to something a little wider, and then we decided, well, maybe we should be able to, we could drive like our workmen over it. So it became a more structural bridge. And then at the end, we decided, well, why don't we make it 8 feet wide to be able to drive a vehicle over it? So that ended up being the $150,000. So Roger kind of explained the differences between the footbridge and the structural bridge.
Yeah, so there's a couple options with supporting the bridge, depending on the soils that are in the area. If the soils are competent enough just to do a cast-in-place concrete footing, it's significantly cheaper than if the soils are mushy and we have to put in some kind of a pile or pile system to support the bridge. And we've got 3 choices. If we just replace that bridge in kind, just a wooden 5-foot wide pedestrian bridge, based upon the bids that we got on the North Bridge, it's somewhere in the $30,000–$35,000 range. To bring in a prefabricated bridge that would span the creek, because right now the existing footings are basically in the water almost all of the time. If we span that a little bit wider to completely bridge the creek, that would be a 28-foot span, and went with a pedestrian bridge. If we could do concrete footings, it would be about $55,000. If we have to do pile footings, it would be closer to $95,000 or $100,000. If we do the same thing but make the bridge a little bit wider and stronger for a vehicle like a pickup truck, you're looking at $70,000 with concrete footings, $110,000 or so with the pile footings. Geotechnical investigation was done last week. I talked to them today. They haven't finished the report yet, but they said that concrete is a possibility. So I think on the cheaper option for the concrete footings is probably the price you're looking at. There won't be it won't be necessary to do pile footings.
What's the inconvenience by not having a vehicle-ready bridge? Like, what's the benefit of having
It was
a
an
vehicle?
ask by the maintenance staff to have a bridge that they could drive over, at least with their work, just so they didn't have to go through the park and come through the middle bridge and go completely around. They could come through the parking lot on 82nd, come right straight to their shop.
And that's adding, the ability to save 2 minutes is adding $90,000 to our bill? Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, the difference between a pedestrian bridge, if you just look at the 2 concrete footings, the difference between a pedestrian bridge and a vehicle bridge is $15,000 to $20,000.
Okay. Is this the bridge that Councilwoman Wen had to donate money for?
No, that's the North Bridge. That's the
Okay.
North Bridge.
So I guess what we're asking is if the council can kind of give us direction on what you would like done with that bridge. Do you want us to move forward with the vehicular structural bridge or just replacing time with the footbridge?
So I had a question with respect to safety and malicious mischief that happens sometimes in our parks. If we have a bridge that's wide enough for vehicles, we know how many cars come through and do donuts in our park. Does that invite people to drive across the park?
You could put a bollard in the middle of the trail, like, 10 feet short of the bridge. That would physically prohibit that. It's not the most attractive thing in the world.
But then the maintenance crew, they have to remove the bollard,
Yeah, it could
which
be a
takes
river.
about 2 minutes.
Could be
instead
a-
of driving down.
Yes.
So budget being an issue, I don't think it's a good idea, my personal opinion. A replace in kind would be a good solution. And it's a park, it's not really meant for traffic or for cars or just a pickup once a day or once a week. That's my opinion.
Others?
I agree.
Do we have, I just want to make sure I have an understanding of how much, what the value of the driving over it is. If the value of driving over it is just saving 2 minutes, as you kind of said jokingly, then.
Right, it's time saving, but yeah, I don't know if it's worth, right.
It's one of those that it was an idea and it's a nice to have, but I think it comes down to the difference between what we need and what we want. And I think now that we now have the information in front of us for the first time as to what the total difference in cost is. And I think from what I'm hearing from council is a residence to do the larger bridge and that you would prefer that we just replace in kind. Is that accurate?
I think that's
Is that
what I'm hearing as well.
Yeah, okay.
I think that's
Yeah, I mean, it's just, we brought this to you because quite frankly, this is the first time we've had the information available to put it in front of you. And so I think we certainly have your direction from that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for getting us the information. Appreciate it. Okay, Julie, you gonna talk with us about finance? We just saved some money, by the way.
Yeah, but it's,
Okay, so just to remind folks, everything that Ryan and Tom just talked about is being paid with real estate excise tax. It is not being paid out of the general fund. All the discussions we've been having about the issues with our general fund have nothing to do with REIT. So, and that goes for 84th as well. He's going to probably be talking about that a little bit later. It has nothing to do with what I'm going to be talking about here. That just gets set aside. We're doing pretty good on our REIT account right now. We're keeping up with as fast as Ryan spends it. But, obviously it's something that it comes and it goes. And these are projects that you can opt out of if, the REIT is quieted down for a while and then spend it when you have it, sort of thing. So also just as to make sure that this is still on everyone's first line talking points when residents start saying, why are we spending so much money on 84th when I hear we're in financial troubles? And I expect everyone to be able to step forward in one united voice and explain all about real estate excise tax and what its limits are. We cannot use it for general fund. We can only use it on projects like these. So, talking point one. And just for an FYI, my quarterly newsletter article is going to be to this point. So, you'll get to hear it again. And there'll be a picture. Okay, so on May 17th, the Finance Committee, Jessica, David, and Cindy met to continue the discussions we've been having regarding the city's financial situation and review new information that had been gathered since your full council retreat in March. But to give context to the meeting report for the members of the public here tonight sitting behind me, I'm going to back up a little bit and speed them through what's happened to this point so they have a sense to what the new materials mean. So I'm actually going to back up to November 2001, but I will go through that decade really fast. Tim Iman's Initiative 747 came in with the election November 2001. It caps property tax at increases to 1% of the total amount of property tax levy. So, for example, this year, Medina's property tax levy, $28 million. That just means that 1% we can only raise next year by $28,000, which you do the math, it comes out to about $25 on an average for residents. So it's not a huge increase year over year. Because keep in mind, out of the whole property tax bill, Medina only gets less than 8% of what the residents pay in their annual property taxes. However, that is our largest source of revenue that can be used for general operations, almost 50% of our budget, close to $6 million worth of a budget. So other sources of revenue we have are not much better off as far as how much movement we can get out of them. They're either stagnant or see modest growth. Revenues have not been keeping pace with the rising cost of providing services. So the simple math on the revenues overall, they only go up between 1.5% to 9% overall per year, while the expenses go up almost 2.5 to almost 4 per year. So you kind of have this point where they cross over, and especially, I mean, this is not sustainable, especially since residents' demands for services beyond the status quo have been increasing lately. So I have a visual. Could we get this? Okay. So, can you still hear me without the microphone if I back up? Yes? No? Okay. So the red line is expenditures, the blue line is revenue. And what you've got going here is that they kind of move in tandem, but there's kind of some, for a better word, fake revenues. When you see big spikes in the expenses and revenues are trailing, are kind of tagging along with it, that doesn't mean that we got a big influx of cash. This means that we've taken money out of our reserves to help cover expenses that are coming in that we weren't expecting. And anytime where you see the expenses, the red line, sitting on top of the revenues, that means that not only did we pull from our reserves, we have also dipped into the fund balance, which is essentially, I think of it as the cushion in the general fund's checkbook. And so as we're going, here we are at 2018, and this is what I was talking about, that we've gotten to the point there are no more reserves. So expenses are going to keep going up on their rate, while revenues are going to keep going up on their rate, and they're starting to spread apart. And this is kind of a look at that, what I call the cushion in the checkbook. As we go through the years going forward, in 2021, the checkbook will go negative. I mean, there's no other way of putting it. So what the council and the finance committee and staff have been talking about has been, what are we going to do about it? We had, let's see, back into my notes. We were fortunate enough entering this new millennium. I mean, this is not an uncommon problem. I mean, cities all over the state since 2001 have been having this problem. They've been addressing this problem. Some of them have done it more than once even. So we're not unique. And the city of Medina was fortunate that we entered the new millennium and post-747 with healthy reserves. But they have gone from their high of 5.5 million to essentially none by the end of this year. Those reserves are what have held off the tough choices that we are now facing for this long. So some examples of what the reserves have been used for: they've subsidized the street fund. It's never been self-sufficient financially. The city hall remodel, legal settlements, paying down debt to save interest costs, and as I kind of pointed out before, filling in the gaps of an unbalanced budget for continued operations. But even without some of the one-time expenses, we would still be having this discussion eventually because it's still the expenses going up faster than the revenues. So since the beginning of the year, we have had a council study session, presentations at this monthly meeting, and one-on-one with council staff. In March, we brought an advisor in. Peter Moy of FCS Group presented at the council retreat. During that time, he presented his analysis of several scenarios that have been proposed prior to help with our struggling financials. I put copies of those out on the table when you came in, along with my business card, in case people want to look at them and get a better feel for what I'm talking about, or if they have questions, would like more information. So I left the March retreat with some homework questions to answer. This was sent to council directly, and that new material was the discussion starting point for last month's Finance Committee meeting. In Peter Moy's presentation, we learned that the target we must hit to keep us from going over that financial cliff with our $6 million operating budget in 2020 is $800,000. So what we kind of took off from there in the Finance Committee meeting was that how do we reach that target? Cuts in services, which, let's be frank, that's cut in people. Additional revenues, combinations of the both. One of the questions that came out at retreat, I think it was actually Roger who gave us this question, is are there any other dials besides property taxes that we can turn to generate more revenue rather than hitting property taxes? New information that came out after that from my homework, current untapped sources and their projected revenues would be business licenses and taxes, which we currently don't have. At most, that'll bring in $50,000 against the $800. And it would be a couple years before that's up and running because we'd have to partner with Department of Revenue. Untapped utility taxes, where Medina is actually only allowed to assess up to 6% against utilities, which is our current rate, without a vote of the people. There still are some utilities we haven't levied, which could bring in a projected 178. So combined, all the rest of the dials we have available to us, I mean, there's something, but they're not going to solve the $800,000 target. The cuts, as Peter outlined, would be substantial in reduced services, and we'd be right back to the edge of the cliff in a few years, having the same discussion again. So the Finance Committee, see, I've made it through a decade and a half now in just 2 minutes. The Finance Committee, after digesting all this, went into brainstorming mode. A few ideas were floated in relation to packaging a levy increase, since it would require at least the least amount of dial volume to generate the necessary funds, roughly approximately $456 extra per medium value house. The pros and cons were not discussed of the ideas that were thrown out there. And that's kind of where we are now. But just to give you guys a break from hearing all this information from my voice all the time, before I move into the timeline that we're facing going forward, I just kind of wanted to ask the Finance Committee members who were in the meeting, kind of if you had anything you wanted to share at this point as far as takeaways or thoughts you had about the materials and what we're doing with the project. Otherwise, I can just keep talking.
David or Jessica?
I think you covered it. The one thing that you explained to us in the meeting that you didn't touch on here was Julie has been attending Mercer Island's similar process and following it all the way through.
They're about a year ahead of us in this.
Very diligent about keeping track of what they've been up to. And they have a citizen commission, and Julie, you should 100% correct me, but if your voice wants a break, I'll try to summarize what you told us. They had a citizen commission, they worked on it for a few months, 4 months, I think you said, and they ended up deferring any sort of capital levy, but
Yeah, because
requesting.
they had two levies that they were considering, a capital and a
requesting
generating.
A higher property tax rate for their council to pass, in combination with an increase to their existing business and occupancy tax, which Medina doesn't have currently. And also, I believe there was another element they had.
Utility tax. Since they own their own utility, they're not as restricted as what they can assess in the way of taxes to it, and they had put a temporary increase on their utility tax to pay for some of their legal costs associated with their I-90 issues. And they were proposing to make that a permanent rather than temporary, as a way to kind of help bridge some of the gap and take some of the pressure off the property tax. So
So for our purposes, I thought it was interesting, one, they had a very specific process they followed, and two, they came up with a kind of a mix of ideas, but they did have to go to the voters and ask for an increase.
yeah. So they're shooting for the ballot in November, which means they have to be done by the end of July with all their materials decisions and what have you. So I saw our future in them, because they had a lot, I mean, even though they're bigger, and they thought it was pretty funny that I was there shadowing them as the big boy, because they think of themselves as so little, because they're next door to Seattle, that I was there to learn how the big kids do it. And but they had a lot of similarities as far as assessed value of their homes being higher than average, that they are essentially a bedroom city that doesn't have a lot of other taxing sources. I mean, they have more than we have, but we're very limited in that we don't have a Costco, we don't have car dealerships, and we'll never have any of those things that generate other forms of revenue outside the property taxes. So we are both, Medina more so, but we're very dependent on property taxes for general operations, and without a lot of other options. So it felt like a good fit to find somebody to follow, and just the timing of, they're so public about what they're doing. They started out their discussion by quoting, "Houston, we have a problem," and it got picked up by the Times, and that's kind of it.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
What's Mercer Island's operating budget?
If you take pretty much all of our numbers and multiply them by 10, our population, our budgets, it comes out about right. So we're kind of a tenth the size of them.
So
So
their operating
600 is-
budget, 60 million?
It's a little bit less, but they have it organized differently in their funds, so it's
Could you just give me a number?
Huh?
60, 70?
Why don't we call a little under 60?
Okay. And then the other question I have is, what's the metric that is used in terms of services against revenue? So, for example, is it measured in terms of head count, meaning for every 100,000, for every 1,000 people you have one person at City Hall? Is it every 500 residents you have one? I'm trying to understand, are there metrics that finance professionals like you use in terms of determining how on or off base a city is operating on?
Well, I mean, specific to head counts,
Head count's just an example.
okay.
I'm just asking in general, what metrics are used to gauge how,
how much of an example they are compared to us.
Yeah,
so-
exactly. Are they in line with other cities? Are they out of line? And it could be head count, it could be anything else, I don't know.
Yeah, because every city is a bit unique. They have their own fire service, we don't. So it's kind of like when you're doing comparables in properties, that you kind of
Right.
have to start adjusting, okay.
That's
they-
exactly what I'm asking. What are our comps? So what do we comp against?
Well, the most common comp is assessed value, which unfortunately is a little too simplistic, because what you do with your tax rate against that assessed value is different to every city. Whether you contract for fire service, whether you have a police department, what kind of police department do you have? There's not really a lot out there like Medina, where you have 3,000 residents, which is a pretty common metric, but yet they have their own dedicated police service. And part of the reason that you can get away with that is because of your assessed value generating a little bit, a lot more income, revenue for us to work with. Did that answer the question? That sounded a little scattered. I wasn't really prepared for that.
Let me take a shot at this. What a lot of cities do is they establish a list of maybe as many as 10 other cities that they want to compare themselves to. And, the way that you try to pick that list of 10 but as Julie said, the number one thing is usually assessed value. Well, other than Clyde Hill, there is not another city in the state of Washington that matches up to us in size and assessed value. So you start looking at other comparables like general fund budget. Okay, cities of 3,000 with a general fund budget of roughly $6 million. You start establishing that list of cities. What I've done in previous cities is we've had a static list of 10 or 12 other cities. And let's say then we want to compare how much we spend for police versus those other cities.
Right.
Of the 10, you may have 6 other cities that have their own police department, but you keep that same full list of 10. So we've got 6 data points out of our 10 that we can compare police services to. You want to compare fire services. You're going to have a couple of those cities that have their own fire department. They may contract with a fire district. They may be like us and contract with another city. Again, you're not going to get 10 data points, but you're going to get, you get 5 or 6 data points that you can use for comparison. And that's essentially what I think you're asking us to be able to do.
That's right.
Is to determine, so we start, I'll just name a few cities. We may look at Black Diamond, we may look at Duval, we may look at Carnation, we may look at Clyde Hill, we may look at Newcastle. And again, those are not going to be apples to apples comparisons, but they're going to be close enough that if we have a static list of 10, 12 cities that we use, we'll be able to get half a dozen data points for a comparison. It's like, and a lot of times this is what you do when you try to decide, are our development fees reasonable? Well, let's look at our 10, 12 other cities and see if our development fees compare to those. So, and this is nothing new. Julie and I have had this conversation a couple of times that, there are some things about Medina that make us very unique, that make it difficult to cobble together that list of comparable cities we're going to pull data points out of. But that's certainly something we can try to do.
Yeah.
So I understand it's difficult to get comps in Washington State. What about comps in other cities that are more similar to ours, maybe up and down the West Coast? I mean,
we can, but the farther you get away, the more you get further away from the apples to apples comparison, in that every state has different laws on property taxes. Just to pick the state next to us, Oregon, for example, has a state income tax. We don't have a state income tax. Washington property taxes go to the state. In Oregon, there is no state property tax. It's just city and county. We can do that now. And if we were to say, okay, let's grab Lake Oswego, let's grab West Lynn, and say those are somewhat comparable to Medina's, higher end communities. You're always going to have to make a little bit of a tweak for them to be different. If we wanted to say, let's compare ourselves to Sausalito, let's look at Medina, let's compare ourselves to some other Bay Area cities. Again, California has very different laws, and now you're dealing with a state that has a sales tax and a income tax, as opposed to Oregon where there's no sales tax. So we can do that, but
I have
the
a
big-
quick question.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So the big cost driver for us are our police and fire, which we've heard from our residents, 100% do not want to have those cut, right? So if we're looking for places to save, it would be on the others' expenses.
Right. If you're not touching public safety, that pretty much takes care, that's 50% of our budget, and property taxes covers that much, and that's it. So development services brings in revenue, so it can probably hobble along. And, so that leaves you left with things like parks and street maintenance and fireworks for Medina Days, and it would be quite a list that it would start cutting into services in a really noticeable way, that you would essentially just have a police department and not a whole heck of a lot else. Because any kind of cuts, it would solve if you recall the materials from Peter, that cuts, yes, it will kind of even out the lines for a while, but they're going to start diverging again.
Alex?
I have a question on the chart, if you can put it back.
Which one, one or two?
The last one that
This
you
one?
had. So if we're looking at this chart, say for example 2024,
Uh-huh.
it shows we are down by about $2 million.
This is if we did nothing, we would be in
If we
debt.
did nothing,
Yeah.
right? This $2 million is not just for 2024, it's a cumulative for the years before that.
Right,
correct?
because it's,
So it's adding every year.
yeah,
Roughly every year we are down by maybe 300 to 500,000 if it stays like this, right?
Hmm.
So I'm looking between the 23 to 24, it's about $500,000. That's correct, right?
a little less, but yes.
So what we are now what we should be trying to save is roughly a 300,000 a year now, which is growing into 500, right? This is kind of my explanation.
Yeah.
My second question, you mentioned something that we paid debt because we wanted to save on interest,
Correct.
right?
Mhm.
And that's why our budget is down.
Well,
That is the post office
our
purchase,
our reserves are down,
right?
because we dipped into the reserves to pay down the
To
debt
pay
for
the debt, which we
the-
were paying,
to acquire the
interest
post
on.
office.
which was the post office, which we own,
Mhm.
which doesn't show anywhere here. And if we sell it now, that's $2 million, which could cover us all the way through 2024.
And then we'd be right back having this conversation, and we wouldn't own a post office.
No, that's correct, but the post office is not a capital expense. It's not a REIT. The money came from general funds to buy it. And it does not show, unlike when we look at our numbers at home, you
Right.
look at your equity, you own property, you own a car, and you own money. We're looking only on cash here. We're not looking at
Right,
the value of the post office.
right. Just what I was, with my little joke, was trying to point out is that the idea of using reserves or one-time money, like selling a post office to fund ongoing operations, is not considered good practice.
I
'Cause-
understand. But the reason why we are dipping down so quickly now, almost 2021, is because we put 1.5 million on the post office.
No, that's, all putting the money on the post office cleaned out the reserves. This is just ongoing, I mean, because the post office will be paid off before we get to 2021. It's not, it's not in the ongoing thing. It just, the post office paying it down cleaned out our rainy day fund. It cleaned out what extra we have that we can put into emergencies. This is just adding into the operation. So, we would still have this movement if we had the 1.7, what was it, how much was the post office again? 1.7?
2.7.
Huh? No, I mean, even if we had this money back, we would still have this,
We will
This-
have the dip,
this-
but
this
it will be
slide.
pushing it a little bit.
well, the way we'd be pushing it would be to spend those proceeds to fund the ongoing operation gap. So,
I mean, what you're saying is there's a structural problem that needs to be fixed. We could sell an asset and push the problem out. But from a structural perspective,
It's
it's
always
still
there. I
there.
mean, you have expenses rising to nearly 4%, and you have revenues, on a good year pushing to 2. So, all right, so any more questions before I go into the future timeline?
Just a comment and a question, actually.
Oh, yeah, sure.
From the last Finance Committee meeting, and I think this is helpful for the public as well, is you had a timeline in terms of how this affected our budgeting for next year, 2019, and when is some of the important dates for the public to start thinking about these things in 2019, 2021?
Yeah.
Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Okay, yeah, this is kind of where I was going to pivot and start talking about what things will be coming your way. So we are at the point of this long-term financial planning project that you should expect some sort of installment at least once a month, whether it's finance committee meeting, presentation here. And so to that front, we have a finance committee meeting this coming Friday on the 15th. And the main objective is going to be to dive down into some of the choices that are going to have to be made for 2019, because just out of the box, it will not be a balanced budget. And staff has been able to kind of cobble together solutions in the last few years as this is getting more difficult to balance the budget. But we need to look at some of the alternatives and get some direction from council on how you want us to balance that budget. And the decisions that will be made by council for 2019 budget, in a way will set the table for what we'll be discussing from 2020 forward. So we're going to kind of play with that at the finance committee level and then take it back to council and for the July study session for the council as a whole. So let's see, we'll incorporate it, and then there'll also be some materials that'll kind of outline some of the things that you were asking about as far as if we don't touch public service, what we would have to trim in the years going forward. Just some example mixes to get a flavor for what would it mean in real life as opposed to getting it out of the numbers. And then August most likely will involve another finance committee meeting. This will be in preparation for, do they know that they're getting a fall retreat yet?
Oh, we're talking about it, yeah.
Oh, okay. So that'll be in preparation for fall retreat because that'll be basically the last time we'll have as a group to start making the decisions that will impact 19, to still be able to make our budget process in time. That's when staff will be looking to have a firm direction from you folks as to how you want to crack this nut, how you want to solve the problem, and then figure out what our future tasks are going to need to be based on what you tell us after the retreat.
Great.
And just to add on to that, one of the things we're going to do during the 2019 budget process is we're going to take a look at 2020 and 2021. We're not going to bring you line item budgets for those 2 years, but we are going to bring you, the idea being, let's take this from the conceptual to the reality of if we were to not make any changes, rather than showing you a chart like that, say this is what's going to happen to city staffing and city service levels in 2020 and 2021 if we choose not to take action.
Yeah.
And so we want to give you a very realistic, pragmatic view of what's to come in the future. I think up to this point, this has been very conceptual. Like I said, it's been some charts and numbers in a spreadsheet. We want to bring that down to the level where we live and actually talk about services.
And this is something that the staff in Mercer Island did for their citizen advisory group early on in the process, is just kind of give them a feel for, I don't think we need to be as elaborate about it as they did, because they actually had every department director get up and describe what their department would look like in 1 year, 2 year, 3 year. But something along that vein is what Michael and I have been talking about to bring forward into the budgeting process when we'll be having our study session in July.
Can I ask another question?
Oh.
So when we contract with outside services for, let's say, fire, are there laws that stipulate what those agencies can charge? So, for example, is it cost recovery only? Is it cost recovery plus some sort of margin there? How does that work?
It's a negotiated agreement.
Yeah, it's a negotiated contract.
We have a 10-year contract with Bellevue Fire that was essentially negotiated between Bellevue Fire, cities, the Points communities, and the city of Newcastle that all contract with Bellevue Fire. So we have an interlocal agreement that was essentially a negotiated contract.
And
Jan?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that, I kind of came into the contract process a little late, but the way that it was the way they calculated it, there was a cost recovery element to it, and they are essentially looking at their cost of providing the services and then finding a way to allocate it in a way that felt fair to the communities involved. So they had, correct me if I'm getting any of this wrong, because like I said, I came in late. They have an amount that they have determined that this is how much that it costs to provide services to the Points community as a whole. And the same things that driving our costs up are driving their costs up. It's personnel, frankly, and benefits. And from that, how do we split it up among the different communities we serve? And they just use the statistics of, yes, assessed value, but it's the smallest driver that they use. It's the smallest thing they apply it against. And calls for service, who uses it the most? Cities that have a large aging population are obviously getting more emergency services. So they eventually arrive at a ratio of how much each city pays for population and assessed value and calls for services of the pie that they're saying this is how much it costs us. And we negotiated that pie even. They were trying to push in more of their new fire station and their capital improvements out to the Points community, and they, and they backed off on some of that. So it was a process that, how long did that take? That was at least a year, wasn't it?
About a year.
Yeah, and I came in and just for the last meeting. So,
Yeah. To answer your question directly, Bellevue is not recovering their full cost of providing services to us. We think we came to a ratio based on a number of different factors that they are charging us a reasonable amount. And I say that because we then kind of trued it up by saying, Redmond contracts with a number of other agencies to provide service outside of Redmond. If we were in that contract, how much would we have paid? If we were in Eastside Fire and Rescue, which provides services to a couple of rural fire districts, the city of North Bend, Issaquah, and Sammamish, if we were in that consortium, how much would we pay? And what Bellevue is charging us is significantly less. We went through this at a council meeting. So I think we can actually document that, first of all, Bellevue's not recovering their full cost. But second, they're giving us a really good price. They're giving us less than what these other cities are charging to provide similar services outside their corporate limits.
When does our agreement with Bellevue end?
It's a 10-year contract, and we're only into the first year.
All right, thanks.
Okay, other questions for Julie? Thanks for a great summary.
did I go over 20 minutes, Amy? Oh. Okay,
You
I'll
did
talk very
great.
fast when it comes to my director report then.
You did
Thank you
great
very
job.
much.
Thanks a lot. All right, Park Board, Planning Commission, and Emergency Preparedness. Park Board?
Hi, I'm Colette McMullen, for those of you I haven't met from the Park Board. And I apologize for my voice, since it's coming and going. This is going to be really brief tonight. At our last meeting, we were talking about expecting the feasibility assessment for the Boardwalk project to come back soon. We're hoping that's going to be back for the meeting next week. In the meantime, what we want to do is take a look. Sorry, Cindy, I see you leaning it. In the meantime, what we want to do is take a look at the Points Loop Trail to see if we do go ahead with that boardwalk study, if it could be possible to incorporate it into part of that trail system. So we're just going to look at it and see just what the possibilities might be. The other thing is Drew just filled out the Argosy cruise ship form for the Christmas ships. So we plan on them coming to Medina Beach again in December. We'll have a similar type event with hot chocolate and cookies and invite the community. And that's about it. We have our meeting next week. We're off in July, and then we'll be back in August.
Great, thanks
Any
very much.
questions?
Did you guys decide whether to do something in June with your volunteer
We
group, or are you
decided
deciding
not
just
to.
too hard?
We couldn't come up with a good date.
Yeah.
And weather's so iffy in June that we felt like it's so weather dependent that if we picked a rainy day, it could not be good. So we might think about it again for next year, but for this year we decided just to put a hold on it. And we also felt like it competed with Medina Days a little bit, and we weren't sure if that made sense because we already have such a big Medina Day celebration in summer. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've got 2 new board members coming on,
yes,
and we're going to vote tonight on creating the emeritus position. So thank you for both of
Yeah.
those
Thank you.
suggestions.
I think
Any
Penny was
questions?
hoping.
Comments for her?
Okay.
Thanks for all your work.
Thank you.
Hope you feel
Thank
better.
you.
Sean, are you going to talk to us about Planning Commission?
So we had a busy session. Let's start this across. This was our first, we talked about in the joint mission session about ways to collaborate or get things better. This is our first version. We haven't kind of voted on it or whatever. Just the 10-minute draw up kind of, this is what we're going to try to do better, how we're going to rate it, some of the ways to work better with
Put on the
council.
screen.
Oh, we can put up there if that's easy for everyone.
Is that something you and Steve worked on together?
Steve, all of us, it was very quick. It was just to get the ball rolling.
Okay.
Nothing, he might not even want any credit for this one. or blame. But this is our work list. we need to get some dates, when did it originate, what is our expectation? Do we have any outside needs? Maybe we need a little bit of money for something. What percentage of completion when we started it? Just what are we doing? In other words, instead of just having a list that things have been on for, we've heard up to 15 years, let's start working it through.
You're going to flesh it out a bit. Okay,
Right.
great. Thank
And
you.
that's, again, first iteration. We did get the church playground amendment and the text passed off to you.
Good luck.
Thank you. You've been working on that
Because it
since-
didn't fail the program, we had to make our own rules, so that's why it takes months and months to do it this way. If we would have failed the system, we would have known what to do and what to fix, but because we ended up, there was no variance failed or anything previously, we just had to make up our own rules and keep pushing, and a lot of discussion, some of it good, some of it heated, but we made it, and it's in your hands now. We'll try to get that done. We also are not gonna have a July meeting. We have a couple of CMPs in June and a light meeting, and that's it. Questions?
So if you don't have a July meeting, when do you think you'll come back with your revised list?
It could be this meeting in June.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thanks for all your work. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Emergency preparedness, no update? Okay. So let's vote on the consent agenda. Any objection to adopting the consent agenda as amended?
Yeah, I just have a slight adjustment on the April 23 minutes, Amy. It states that I was attending the entire meeting and the executive session. I left before the executive session, so if you want to adjust that.
And also, the meeting, I wasn't there to have.
Yeah, when is absent, so it lists that correctly, but it lists me as present.
Got it.
I was supporting you with my full heart, but I wasn't here.
Okay, with
That's
that,
about it.
with
So
that,
motion to approve the consent agenda.
second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Been moved and seconded. All in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. Thank you very much. Okay, we'll move into our public hearing. And with help, we have a script so that we know what to do here. So we'll start. The public hearing for the zoning map amendments and rooftop play area text amendments is now open. All persons wishing to be heard should have either signed in or can sign in now. I have a number of speaker cards. If you haven't filled one out yet and you'd like to be heard, please fill out a speaker card. Briefly going through the rules of order, we'll proceed in an orderly fashion. Everyone will be given an opportunity to be heard. All comments, please make them from the podium. If you need assistance getting to the podium, please let us know and we'll make arrangements and accommodations. Each person will be given an opportunity to address the council for initial period not to exceed 3 minutes, please. If more time is needed, we can circle back and have a second comment period at that time. We request that council members hold their questions of the public until everyone is done. It is not necessary to either be a proponent or an opponent in order to speak. There should be no demonstrations, clapping, or cheering during or at the conclusion of anyone's presentation. Please do not debate one another during public presentation. Please do your best to make sure no other individuals are embarrassed by exercising their rights of free speech. Okay. Do any council members have any interests, financial or property, to disclose in connection with this matter, even though this is a legislative matter, just as a matter of good, good conscience? Let's just say if anyone has any possible conflicts. I have attended as many of the open hearings as I could. I've attended the open house here at the City Hall and at St. Thomas and have spoken to a number of the members of St. Thomas about this project. Jessica?
Similarly, I was just trying to recall if this came up while I was still on planning commission. It may have. And I know I have attended the presentation there as well as presentations to city council, both before I was on city council and as a council member. I've also attended the open house held by the city where I was able to talk to many members of the St. Thomas community and look at the plans. I don't have any personal interest, although I
Okay, thank you.
That seems like a conflict, but
Alex, any?
Nothing beyond the official meetings that we discussed it here.
Okay, thank you. David?
Nothing.
Sheree? Jen?
Nothing.
Roger?
Nothing.
Okay, based on our disclosures, does anybody feel like any of us should be conflicted out? No? Okay, let's move forward. The purpose of the hearing is for the council to hear and consider pertinent facts and to take actions relating to the zoning map amendments and the rooftop play area text amendments. The order of speaking will be the staff presentation, then comment from members of the public, response from staff, questions from council members. Before hearing from the members of the public, I'm going to introduce Steve Wilcox and Christina Hayworth, who will make the staff presentation.
It was sometime last fall that former director Robert Grumbach received a phone call from St. Thomas School staff and was asked for a meeting. Robert asked me to attend the meeting with him. School staff expressed a desire for additional play area, but the property configuration would not easily accommodate it. A unique idea was presented that a rooftop play area could be constructed. The questions then became how to accommodate this request, or how could it be accomplished and how. The City Council added the topic of rooftop play areas for all Medina schools to the Planning Commission's 2018 work plan. And in January, the Commission went to work. For 5 months, the Planning Commission diligently worked through a wide variety of complicated issues. On April 25th, there was an open house, which was the first opportunity for our attorney Scott, Christina, and myself to be involved in this matter. On May 22nd, the Planning Commission met and approved code text and zoning map amendments recommendations to be forwarded to City Council. Tonight, we're here to present the recommendations for zoning map and code text amendments related to rooftop play areas for Medina schools. Presenting the agenda bill is our planner, Christina Haworth, with support from acoustic consultant Iona Park, and our attorney, Scott, and myself.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
So as Steve said, I'm Christina Hayworth, just for the record. I will present, hopefully briefly. The way that I have organized this presentation is that we have a short section on background just in case anybody is present that hasn't previously been involved in the process. And then we have a number of items that we are recommending you discuss. And so I would like to identify what each of those discussion items are and why we have identified them for discussion, and then take questions on each of the items. There are a total of 9 presented in your agenda bill. So I think instead of going through the whole thing, if we just discuss them one by one, that might be easier. But let me know if you prefer to do something different. All right, so with that, today we have 2 items in front of the City Council. The first item is the area-wide zoning map amendment ordinance, which is attached as Exhibit 1 to the agenda bill memo. This Exhibit 1 also includes map exhibits 1A and 1B, which clearly identify the proposed rezone area and present the final adopted zoning map. Exhibit 1 had no further items identified for discussion, and staff didn't have any recommended changes to that, so this pretty much concludes my comments on that piece. The second item that we have in front of you today are the proposed code amendments needed to implement rooftop play areas within our Unified Development Code. The Planning Commission's final recommendation, which was reviewed and approved by the commissioners prior to this evening's meeting, is attached as Exhibit 2 to the agenda bill. Exhibit 3 to the agenda bill is a redlined version of the Planning Commission recommendation for discussion, which addresses the items identified by the Planning Commission, the City Attorney, and City staff after the Planning Commission's recommendation was approved. The process to date began in November of last year. City Council put this on the Planning Commission's work plan. As Steve mentioned, over the course of about 5 months, the Planning Commission considered all of the code and zoning map amendments, met on the 22nd of May to recommend the code and zoning map amendments that are before you tonight. Here we are, the 11th of June 2018, and we begin with City Council consideration of code and map amendments. At this point, we are not anticipating final action to be taken tonight because we have a number of issues that still need to be resolved. And so we've put potentially the July meeting as the targeted adoption date. So tonight's meeting is going to be focused primarily on the proposed code amendments and the 9 items for discussion in the agenda bill. It is a public hearing, so we are able to collect testimony. We will take direction from City Council to prepare a draft ordinance for next meeting. All right, here we go. So here's the list of issues that are identified in the agenda bill that we will go through one by one, beginning with reorientation of substantive criteria. So this begins on Exhibit 3, pages 4 to 6. At the time of the May 22nd Planning Commission meeting, legal review had only been partially completed. Legal review of the proposed code revisions has since been completed, and a number of items have been identified for clarification. So you see the notes identified by SMM, that's our City Attorney Scott Masal's initials. Development Services staff also reviewed the proposed code language and identified several items to clarify application of the code changes themselves. So those would be notes identified by staff. Most of the suggested changes are intended to group like requirements together in an effort to improve the logical flow of the code amendments. The changes help simplify everything to provide requirements that are easy to interpret, apply, and enforce. So, does anybody have questions? Did everybody have an opportunity to read through the proposed code language and compare it to the Planning Commission's recommendation? Does everybody or anybody have any questions about how we chose to reorganize everything?
No, I think you can just move forward and let's talk about each one of them in order.
Okay, great. So the second item for discussion would be the physical characteristics of rooftop play areas. This is covered on pages 4 to 5 of Exhibit 3. A number of changes related to the physical characteristics of the rooftop play areas have been proposed, which include modifications to portions of the structure that can extend into the bonus height area. We tried to clarify exactly what those were and how to treat non-permanent structures like soccer goals or other kinds of temporary play equipment that might be used in such a play area. We've also clarified requirements for the security barrier fence and which specific permanent structures are subject to the 3-foot setback from the outer edge of the building. Part of this is driven by review of the definition of structure in the code and how it's actually quite a broad definition. So just trying to really be specific about what elements are and are not allowed to be installed permanently and how to deal with things that are just for temporary use. A large section beginning on page 5 of Exhibit 3 clarifies mitigation requirements. This is actually discussion item 5 in the agenda bill, so we'll get into that a little more in just a minute. Any questions on that one? All right. Okay, so noise impacts was the third discussion item. Stantec completed a noise study on behalf of St. Thomas School, which was sent to third-party review by BRC Acoustics, and Ayana Park, there you are, is here to talk about her findings in the third-party review.
Thanks, Christina. I'm Ioana Park. Some of you may have see me before speaking to the council. Our role in this proceeding was to peer review the noise report conducted by Stantec. It was on behalf of the project architect. And what we looked at were criteria that were used to identify noise impacts, methodology for characterizing the existing environment around the property, as well as potential future sound levels, and then conclusions that the study drew regarding possible noise impacts. And the one thing that we noticed right off the bat was that the Stantec report did not cite any criteria for what represents a noise impact. So that was, well, I should rephrase that. It did not characterize noise impacts as an absolute sound level. For example, 55 dBA or 60 dBA. It only characterized noise impacts by virtue of increases over the existing environment. And that is appropriate because sound from unamplified human voices is actually exempt from the Medina Municipal Code. We just thought that it would be constructive and informative to know, just for comparison, what the noise limits are for residential source and receiver properties in the city of Medina. And those numbers are 55 dBA for what we call the LAQ, the equivalent sound level, which for all intents and purposes is an average sound level. And then 15 dBA above that is allowed for very short one-time events. And the Stantec report does a good job of defining all these descriptors, but I'll be happy to go back over them if necessary. Otherwise, our takeaway from the report is that both the existing sound levels and the projected future sound levels from this playground are expected to be within the range or below these permitted daytime sound levels. Also, we have looked at the methodology that was used to characterize the existing environment and the methodology of characterizing future sound levels that could be expected from this facility. And all of that is correct and is properly applied, and we agree with the conclusions of the study. I just wanted to I just wanted the council to be aware of some limitations of this report before you make a decision. And one of the limitations, I thought, was that no baseline sound level measurements were conducted for properties to the east. The study does analyze future sound levels that could be received at these residences. Those would be residences east of 84th Avenue. But it does not present the baseline conditions. And it's probably justifiable in light of the fact that these residences probably experience considerable traffic noise, especially at the second story windows of the residences. And it would not surprise me at all if it were reported that the playground in its current configuration is completely inaudible at these residences.
I have a few questions.
Yes, Councilmember Wen.
Number one, the graph you have in the report, I can't read it. The word is so small, the scale is unreadable. It's
Right.
very difficult for any judgment about the noise just based on the graph you show here.
Right. So,
It's very difficult. I'm saying so we can't make any judgment, and with all the words, we have to have magnifying glass, which we don't have here.
Mike, can we get bigger printouts?
We sure can. I think the graph you're referring to is that.
It's all the
it-
graphs
is
here.
actually, yeah, this graph is actually in Stantec's report that was provided by the school. So
Oh, those are provided by school,
So
I
we
see,
could-
not
we-
by you.
No,
Okay.
so we certainly can ask for,
Yeah.
bigger graphics.
Yeah.
But this is the report that we received.
Right. And the number 2 is you don't have a baseline, and this is, I guess this measurement, the measurement must be current measurement with the current configuration, right?
yes.
And where is the acoustic devices are related to the school? How far is it?
Right, so that's.
Because the distance have a huge differences relevant.
course.
Yes,
Of
right.
course, right. So, just to make sure,
Yeah.
this is the report that we reviewed
Right.
on
You
behalf
reviewed.
of the
Right.
city.
Okay.
Yeah, the Stantec report was provided to the city.
Okay.
We then asked our consultant to do a peer review of it.
So
so
do you have
so
another
the-
set of measurement?
No, but actually, if you page back through that same report
Yeah.
to figure 1.
Yes.
And, no, figure 2, I'm sorry. There are 2 triangles called upper measurement location and lower measurement location. They are both west of the golf course.
I only have figure 3.
Uh,
Oh, that's
page-
a measurement location.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, page 2, figure 2 of the report.
Okay.
So those are the measurement locations. They are, we think they're appropriately selected. They are a little bit closer to the playground than the nearest residences. But we consider them appropriate.
Yeah, and the third question is, this is the current condition. When after we build, we will have a walls around it, and how is it affect? It's going up and further as amplified situation. So do we have some kind of estimate or some kind of understanding how that works?
Right. And
The reason we are worried about it is because of 520 noises, we had such a big issue, so we couldn't fix. And so the residents have a lot of issues with it, and we don't want to create another issue if we are not careful.
Right, well, this is no 520. No, Stantec actually did a great job of modeling the effect of the fact that, unlike the existing playground, this proposed playground will be off the ground at a higher elevation, and that it will have these
You mean
parapet walls.
staff with the staff who did the measurement, who did the estimate? Who did
Actually,
simulation?
one of the authors of the Stantec report is in the audience tonight, so I will do my best to give the
Possible
city.
have him, if he did, and he did the report, if he can do something, say something.
Madam Mayor and Councilmember Nguyen, this is Ian Morrison on behalf of the applicant. We have Michael Yantis from Stantec, who would be happy to answer any questions on behalf of the applicant.
Great.
In relation to noise during the public comment period, if that works.
Okay.
Great.
Right, so I, however, will do my best to give my reaction as a consultant to your city staff to this report. The Stantec report did construct a noise model that does take into account the elevation of these playgrounds and the physical relationships between the facility as it stands now and the future facility as proposed. as well as the fact that there will be these parapet walls. And all the results of all this modeling are summarized in Table 3 on page 10 of the Stantec report. What I wanted to point out with the slide that you have up right now were some of the reasons that this particular table should be taken with a certain grain of salt. I think that what the table accomplishes beautifully is to give a comparison of how sound levels from the future playground compare to those from the existing playground. And it pretty much shows that as compared to the existing playground, the future playground is expected to cause a little bit higher sound levels for receivers to the east, and about equal, if not lower sound levels for the residences to the west. Now this table says nothing about baseline sound levels, so it doesn't say anything about how these levels compare to traffic and to other elements of the acoustic environment at these residences. And the other limitation of this table, I think, is that the table was constructed with a specific purpose of comparing the existing with the future sound levels strictly attributable to the playground. However, there are some caveats, and even the report itself on page 9 makes the statement that the predicted levels are only valid with respect to one another, not with respect to the sound levels measured as part of the baseline assessment. And we just wanted to point that out, that care should be exercised in trying to compare these sound levels with the absolute sound levels that you saw from traffic. These are strictly a comparison of the existing versus the future playground. And then in our report, in our review, we discuss some additional data processing that could be done to get a little bit of a better handle of an absolute scale against which these sound levels can be compared.
May I just make a clarifying statement? The 520 noise isn't traffic noise. It is expansion joint noise. The overall traffic noise is lower. And I think that we are comparing apples to apples in that the overall noise level in the community is a certain level. Like, we've heard children out here all night, and they're very distracting throughout the evening. And to raise a playground up to 35 feet, you know, I'm reading a sound study that says an average child shouting in a schoolyard is 87 dBA, right? And so if you have a lot of them, it gets very noisy very quickly. And I live near Bellevue Christian,
Yes.
and it is noisy during the day.
Oh, absolutely.
I can't do conference calls with the window open.
Absolutely.
So-
And of course, I think that the 87 dBA, and I don't have that study right in front of me. I think that is either at a few feet from the said child, or it might be what's called a sound power level. So it's just
it is sound power.
Yeah. Is that the same study that says that the average child on a playground will shout for 30% of the time on average? Yes.
The measurement in table 3.
Yes.
I was trying to understand how these were measured. They say they were measured in the playground, on the ground, and on the top.
They were not
they
measured,
actually
they were calculated.
Calculated.
Yes.
based on producing a fake sound and measuring and calculating it at a distance, or having actually 20 kids playing and screaming?
Well, that's the thing. The Stantec did the appropriate job of modeling these two playgrounds as what's called area sources, which is you consider the horizontal area that's occupied by the playground, and then you distribute little sources that represent individual children, and that becomes sort of your source. It's this extended object sitting either on the ground or on the roof. The report itself admits that the actual source level that it assigned to these two sources is approximate, because they did not attempt to actually measure the sound of the children screaming, or they did not invoke that report that you're looking at. So there is a limit to what the report says is that since at the measurement locations that they used, which were, as Councilmember Wen just found out, were almost at the residences. Mm-hmm. Yes, of course it is hard to isolate the contribution of the playground when you're that far away. But there are methods to conduct some measurements closer to the existing playground, and then also maybe consult sources such as the study that Councilmember Garon was citing.
But so I'm trying to understand what it means when you say 40 dBA at a certain location. 40 dBA is very low. We are speaking at 50 over 40,
yes.
Right? So it's nothing, 40 dBA. Is that the attenuation that comes at 40? So if the student at 85 screaming in the school, at the residence we hear them at 85 minus 40?
No, you actually, with the caveats that I've mentioned, you would hear a level of 40 at those residences east of 84th Avenue. Of course, we have seen that, or we would have seen if there were baseline sound measurements at these residences, that probably traffic noise right now is, I don't know, probably well into the 50s
right.
At these locations. And so probably the conclusion would be that the existing playground is not audible at these residences, and will, even though it will go up by 4 or 5 dBA, it probably will continue to be inaudible. But the one solid piece of information that you can glean from this table 3 is that whatever sound levels are currently strictly attributable to the playground, it'll go up by 5 or 4 to 5 dBA as to the east.
But not to the west.
To the west, you can look at the same comparison, and it shows that the levels go down by 2 to 5 dBA.
And just to be clear, on the east, are we talking about across 84th on the Clyde Hill side? Are those houses we're talking about?
They're east of 84th Avenue. If you look at the Stantec study again, on page 9, figure 7,
I think I was just trying to orient people, because I was pretty sure that was the houses we're talking about.
Yeah, I'm not sure offhand.
Over on the Clyde Hill side across 94th.
Yeah, I'm not sure where Clyde Hill starts, but they are just east of 84th.
Okay, thank you.
Could I ask a question, please?
Yes.
And maybe the author needs to answer this question. So when I read this a couple times, and maybe you can help me understand the nuance, because I'm not sure I do. Report states, quote, "The figures seem to show a trend of higher noise levels when children are present compared to periods of time when they are not."
Right.
So, to me, that reads as blindingly obvious, or when you say, but when you insert the word seems, what's going on here? What am I, is there something I'm missing in that sentence?
Right. So, yes, it is, and we all recognize that it is very difficult when you're, I don't know, I think probably these measurement locations were at least 500 feet away from the existing playground. And you have traffic, and you have activity at the country club, and you have all kinds of other sources that they point out in their sort of bobbing needle graph. And yes, it is hard to say what the actual contribution of the playground is. And it is even hard, I mean, they did a good job of partitioning off sections of the graph that correspond to no activity at the playgrounds from those with activity. And it's still hard to distinguish whether it's higher or not. So the other limitation that I pointed out was that there could be some data processing done even on these graphs to take out at least what are very obviously extraneous events and then recalculate.
Excuse me, that's kind of where I was going here.
Yes.
So is it, maybe just to make this really simple, if someone was to measure the playground sounds on a particularly noisy day, you might say there's really no impact versus maybe a day that was particularly quiet. Is that what's going on here? Or
Right.
how should we understand what we're being told here, I
Right.
guess, is my question.
Right.
So I see there was trucks backing up, I see there are
Yes.
people blowing whistles, I get all that. So is the report saying, given all these other noises that may have happened to occur that particular day, it's not that much noisier than what was happening? Or should we have a different baseline that we should be using? Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, I think that two things in this report could be refined. One is that the tables that were derived from these graphs of baseline measurements, the tables 1 and 2 on page 8, which represent baseline existing conditions, they could be revised to take out some of the contributions of at least the most egregious extraneous event, like the one truck backing up, or the recognizable events. There are things like continuous traffic that you won't be able to isolate between baseline and playground noise. But the other thing that could be also refined are the results in Table 3, which are the calculated sound levels from the playground. And I think that if you took a more refined source level, you could at least predict some absolute sound levels that can be compared to these baselines. I mean, just from some order of magnitude checks that we did on these sound levels, it is probably correct that all the sound levels from the playground will stay probably below 55 dBA, and so they'll probably stay within the range of the existing sound levels. But of course, during lulls between traffic, you're going to hear the kids, and that is true today, and that will be true in the future as well.
The study was done on one day where there was occasional light rain. Do we know why it wasn't done on a sunny day when more kids might have been outside playing to get a more accurate representation of the noise level?
Well, actually, measuring on a day where fewer kids were present actually paints a conservative baseline. because, you know, if you went on the noisiest playground day of the year, then you could make the point that the baseline is so high, you have absolutely nothing to, there is no way that it could be increased.
So then what you're saying is that, so then theoretically, someone should have come like on a Saturday when there's no one at school to get a baseline. Is that what you're saying?
The only problem
I mean,
with-
I'm not trying to be smart, but I think we're all trying to ask you is what is the meaningful difference here that we should be looking at?
Right.
So I think we all understand like cars going by.
Yes.
Sure, we get that. But then we have these other things going on in here, and then the report says it seems to be louder when there are more kids, but it doesn't say that it is. It says that it seems, which kind of makes me wonder, like, frankly, it kind of makes me wonder, like, what's going on here? So now, to your point about baselining, if we wanted to get a baseline, would you then recommend that someone does come out, like, on a Saturday when it's quieter, and then come back when school's in session? I'm just trying to understand how do we look at this?
I think that the best measure of a baseline that you could derive is from the periods labeled as no recess in these graphs, and there is one on somewhere between 11:50 and 12. 11:50 and 12 is called no recess.
Mhm.
That is probably your most reliable baseline of no kids present. But again, that is also imposing too stringent a limit, because the existing playground is a permitted activity. It is part of the existing,
Yeah, but it's good to measure when people, the kids are in class, and when the recess they come out to play, so you can see a different in gap to see how much difference is on the kids inside and outside.
right. And then,
Right.
so you take your best guess by looking at these graphs, and sort of the average, yes, you
So
can.
you can average, for example, half an hour the kids are outside for the recess, then half an hour, 1 hour they're inside. So you just adjust that, and then you can make a delta on that one. Then you pretty much can assess how much these
Right.
differences, right?
Right, so here we have an example. There's a period of no recess where the equivalent sound levels is 53.8. And then immediately after, there's a high volume recess, and the average level goes from 53.8 down to 53.6.
So on the west side, there's a new home being built,
Yes.
very near that measurement site. So you wouldn't expect it to be at a quote-unquote normal level of ambient neighborhood noise. You would expect it to be at a construction level of ambient neighborhood
Right.
noise. And I don't see that noted anywhere in this report, so I don't know what was going on at that
Right.
site that day or how much impact that may or may
Right.
not have had. But it's a little side note in my mind when I look at that is, was that the truck that, I don't know. But I do, when it's my turn, I do have a series of questions to ask
Right.
when Councilmember Wen is done.
So that, and probably I'll move it to questions just as soon as I summarize the fact that I think that the general conclusions of the Stantec report are correct regarding audibility and regarding increases and decreases in sound levels from playground. I would like to point out another caveat, which is that the study was done under the assumption that either the kids that are now using the lower playground are all going to move up to the upper playground, or they're going to stay where they are, or they're going to be distributed between the two playgrounds. And that, I think, was based on the knowledge that there will be no increased enrollment at the school. However, I think that one thing that should be taken into account is that right now, this report shows maybe 70 kids using the lower playground at a time. the school enrollment is over 300, it would stand to reason that adding the new playground will offer the capacity to bring more kids outside at the same time. And so maybe there should be some analysis of what if both playgrounds together were used at the same time. And you could see probably sound levels that are 3 dB higher than what was presented in the report.
In the figures, you have a lower measurement and a higher measurement. What's the difference? What is a lower? What is higher? What does that mean? With all these figures, you have lower measurement, higher measurement. What does that mean?
Well, what each of these figures is, and they are hard to read because the sound level fluctuates a lot.
Yeah.
And so the comparisons that you would be making would be between the various segments of this graph, and between the segment showing 40 students versus 36 students versus no students, and so on.
But it's like the figure 3 says it's upper measurement.
Upper measurement means at the location that they labeled as the upper.
That location is
Yes.
upper level.
Yes.
How high is high? How much higher is upper to lower? What's the difference?
Oh, I think that what they meant by upper and lower was north and south, although there could be some elevation difference too. But they are shown in figure 2.
Jessica?
Okay, so, I think you sort of answered this, but where in the report, if anywhere, can I see, modeling of the overall sound of both playgrounds in use at the same time? We just don't have that, is that right?
The comparison was made between just the lower playground at its current configuration or just the upper playground. If you want to compare what both of them together, it is what's called an energy sum between the two levels. So if let's take one example. In table 3, we have the location that's called West High P1. And we have a predicted sound level of 41 from the current lower playground and a predicted level of 39 from the future proposed. If you put together 41 and 39, the sum would be 43. That's unfortunately how the addition of sound levels works. And so that's kind of what I'm saying, is that probably combining them, the most that you will get is one of the sound levels in this table plus 3 dB.
So I'm not an acoustics engineer, but I'm curious about that particular site because it's both on the flat golf course,
Mhm.
which is the sort of wide open space, and also in a bit of a valley where to the west the residences go uphill.
All right, so yeah, so that I can see how that's reflected in the predictions that are in table 3. So you're right that West High P1 does show the lowest predicted sound level. So instead, if you went to the West H2, that does show higher sound levels.
Okay, so my next question is, because I don't know acoustics, I have wondered if, for example, there might be some effect that the golf course has, sort of like water, where sound travels across the golf course and we're going to hear about noise from someone somewhere down the golf course because it's a big open area. And so is that anything we should be at all concerned about? Is there a noise effect
be wide open golf course space? That was actually well represented in the model.
Well, wait, I think I need you to explain that to me, because none of these sites are, across the, I mean, they're just directly across the golf course. They don't go any further down toward the clubhouse, right? So, if I understand, maybe I'm just misreading this map, but it looks to me like the highest point here, the furthest away to the west sample that is taken is at, well, it must be about at the corner of Northeast 14th Street and the path up next to the golf course. Maybe I have to wait, but yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
So we haven't looked at the other we haven't looked, I guess that would be north down the golf course.
Oh, right. Well, because there are no noise-sensitive receivers in that direction, unless you start counting the clubhouse.
The golfers.
So, so then the answer to my general question is no, the sound does not travel across the golf course such that it might reach a residence near the clubhouse. We wouldn't expect that to happen.
I'm not seeing any residences near the
It's
clubhouse.
too far. It would travel, but it's way too far.
Well, so that's my question is, because it's wide open and flat and there's nothing there, does it travel farther or not?
Actually, I would not expect it to. Since it travels mostly sort of grazing the ground, I would expect that it would be attenuated a little bit better than it would be to the houses on the hill, where the sound, the ground goes kind of like this. The sound travels straight up through the air. It doesn't graze the ground, so it probably experiences less attenuation.
Okay, and that was my next question, which is that then to the west of these samples, the slope continues up a fair bit, and so we haven't looked in this study that I can see at a point of the ground that would be as high as 35 feet in the air yet. Right, we're still down on the ground at West 5.1. We haven't gone up the hill where we'd be closer to the level of the playground. And so, would we expect the sound to travel straight across like that, such that it could actually be louder further away but farther up the hill?
Well, if I'm fairly familiar with the topography going west from the playground, from the golf course, and it would seem to me that these residences that are west of the golf course are considerably higher up than the 30 feet in the air that represents the roof of the building. You can correct me if I'm wrong. But in any case, any of these effects, whether the sound is traveling, grazing to the ground or through the air, are well represented in the results. So just as long as we pinpoint a little bit of a more accurate source level, all these predictions will sort of move up and down accordingly. So the attenuation that was modeled between the source and the receivers is correct. It is just a matter of making sure that we're using the correct source levels. And so what is correct in these tables is the comparison between the various receivers as you go down in one column, as well as the comparison between parallel columns.
Can I ask? So just in a simplistic way, there is an existing playground right now, which is not going anywhere. We're not closing that playground.
Right.
If we build a new playground next to it, you would think on average all the homes, whether on the east or the west, will hear it at a 3 decibel more
No.
than the existing playground at maximum?
No, no. I mean, for one thing, the houses to the west, the modeling shows, and this is a reliable result of the modeling, the modeling shows that the exposure from the new playground will be a lower sound level than from the existing
but
playground.
if I'm sitting at my home, I don't care if the noise is coming from the new playground
Right.
or the old playground.
Right.
The noise I'm going to hear in my house, is it going to be about 3 decibel more than what it is today? Or 2 decibel?
Right, right.
Something like that, because I understand 3 decibel is the first one you can perceive. Anything below 3 decibel, you cannot hear the difference. Is that correct?
Right, that is probably about right for sounds of similar
So assuming the new
character.
playground is at worst the old playground plus 3 decibel, it means it's barely perceptible.
Right, right, that is exactly
Okay, so I
right.
don't need all the numbers. I mean, that explains what to expect.
Right.
Okay, and then that helps, can I follow up?
Please.
So then taking that, to what extent does that depend on the assumptions about the background level of noise? For example, the home under construction, as the sort of the level of background going on, while the difference in recess from background is measured.
Right, right, and I don't know how close these measurement locations were to that particular home under construction. They look pretty far away from the actual residences. But there are two answers to this question. One is that the comparison between existing playground and future playground, as they're presented in Table 3, are correct. They have nothing to do with existing construction or anything. These are strictly calculated sound level from kids playing. If you want to compare those sound levels with, not with just the existing levels from the existing playground, but the overall environment at a particular residence, traffic and golf club activities and everything, then you need these levels in Table 3 to be a little bit better nailed down, for one thing. And then you need to know about things such as what was the contribution of existing construction to the baseline sound levels.
But you're saying that the conclusions that they came to comparing playground noise to playground noise, in your opinion, that's accurate?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Okay.
Any other questions? Would it be helpful, I want to poll council, would it be helpful to hear from the expert who put together this report now, or would you like to hear from him later?
I'd prefer now.
Okay, is that okay?
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Mr. Morrison, we'd like to now just talk about the noise if we could.
Yeah, I'm just, again,
Thank
for the
you.
record, and I'll bring up Mr. Yantis from Stantec. For the record, Ian Morrison with McCullough Hill here on behalf of the applicant. We'll have some comments about the rest of the project. What I wanted to do, just to give a little context about the noise study before we have Mr. Yantis speak, is just talk a little bit about where we are in the process and how we got here, which is, I want to be very clear. This noise study we did was a voluntary noise study that talked about how setting the table for the legislative discussion about whether the council wants to support rooftop play areas. This is not the noise study that is for the special use permit. This is something that we provided to hope give you context about the noise because we knew that was an area of concern. So we agree with Ms. Park's comments. I think you should think of that as these are great constructive criticisms to expect to see responses to and involvement in the actual special use permit, because there is an entire additional noise evaluation that goes on here. So what we were trying to do here was to give some context at the legislative level to help you make that policy choice. So I just want to give you that framework. We're not holding this out to be the noise study. That would be a component of a special use permit process. But with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Yantis.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Michael Yantis. I'm a principal at Stantec
Thank you.
in acoustics. You're welcome.
Children are noisy. That's the takeaway.
Yes, that's one of the takeaways.
So I think you heard some of the questions here. Before we start with questions, is there anything that you'd like us to take away from the questions that were coming forward? Any conclusions? Anything that you'd like to correct?
Sure. So, well, not so much correct. This is confusing, I know, and we acousticians try to keep this confusing for career retention. But I was present while we took measurements. There were 3 of us total out there on the day that we took measurements, and we had one person located on the east side of the golf course, and I was a roamer counting kids on the playground and watching that activity. And then we had one person actually on west of 84th, but those measurements didn't turn out for us. There was something wrong with the calibration, and so we weren't able to report those in the report. We did a couple of things. The predictions that we made were at a height of 16 feet above the ground at the homes, and so it's not all the way up the hill, but it does represent the upper level of a listener at those homes. And you would expect that as you move further up the hill, you get further away from the playground, and so the sound is going to continue to diminish. And then there's homes that also interrupt the sound in addition to the ground and the trees that were on the golf course. And so I would expect that the noise levels, as you go further up the hill east of the west of the golf course, that sound level that we predicted would continue to decrease a little bit anyway.
As I look through it, I don't see how you model for the noises being made at 35 feet as opposed to, ground levels. Where is that in there, and how does that typically affect noise traveling further or not?
Right. So would you clarify your question? The 35 feet was for the
rooftop.
The rooftop, yes.
Yeah.
So in the computer program, we put in where the buildings are, existing buildings, height, and we put in the height of the playground, the new
current
gym
playground?
building, and the parapet around the playground. And then we put the source height at 4.5 feet. Children, we figured a child height average. As Amanda said, as that area source on the playground. So we assumed that kids were evenly distributed around the area of whatever playground we were modeling. And so that source is at the height that we would expect them to be. And then,
So the height that you expect them to be is 39.5 feet off
Right.
the ground? Okay.
and then we were able to import the topography digitally using Google Maps or Google Earth. And so it automatically goes into the computer program as in the right topography to represent the ups and downs between the playground and the receivers. And then we had to, by hand, enter in, tell the computer program basically that this is an area of grass, and we modeled the pond between the playground and the homes because sound travels differently over water than it does grass, and we put the few little copses of trees that were in there, we put that in the program too.
So according to the tables, it looks like the model says it goes down when it's raised?
Right. And there's a couple of explanations of why that's true. The existing playground sits much like this arrangement of buildings as the playground's in the middle of buildings surrounding it. So it's like a megaphone that's broadcasting that sound out now towards the residences to the west. The new playground isn't in that area, it's off to the side. And so even though it's taller, which you're right, the taller doesn't have the same effect for ground attenuation because the sound isn't skipping over the ground like it is down lower, but it's taller And that parapet is high enough compared to the height of the receivers to provide what we call barrier attenuation for the kids on the roof.
So how about the distance? This, because it's higher, it travels more, have less barriers, right? So the distance, or it's because of your model, the sound travel broadcast downwards because of the second level is 16 feet instead of 35 feet.
The program would assume that the source is radiating in like a half plane, so uniformly like a dome, if you would, over the playground.
Right.
And so it's uniform over that entire dome. But again, if this is the playground, it's got this small lip at the edge. So there's a shadow that it creates when the receiver is lower in height.
So that goes to my question, which is.
Travel further? Because
Right, there isn't a measurement, right, that would be at the level of above the parapet
We didn't.
with the distance.
So at some point in time, as you go far enough back, each time you double the distance from the source, we get a 6 dB reduction, and so that's working in the favor of decreasing the sound levels. As you go up higher, if you get high enough and look over the parapet, then you'd see the children. And we didn't model that. That's something we can do in the next version. It makes sense to do that. But my hunch is that as we get further away and the homes that are intervening between those receivers too, that we're going to see a continued decrease of sound level as we move further up the hill.
So we would expect it to be less than the 43 we were talking about, even though it's no longer going down, now it's going out, but it's presumably going far enough out before it hits even.
And remember what I want to state it several times, that the 43 that we're measuring technically can only be compared to the other predictions in this table. It's not too far off from what we measured, but it's not exact either because we couldn't get so you can hear sounds in the midst of other sounds. So the playground noise was actually generally quieter than what our sound level meters were measuring because they were measuring aircraft flyovers and they were measuring traffic and they were measuring a backup beeper and lawn mowing equipment and so forth. We didn't purposely pick a noisy day, by the way. We just went out there on a day and whatever was happening is what we measured. So the levels that were measured, what we know for certain is that the playground noise was no higher than what we showed in all those figures with all the graphs with the sound levels varying at any one time. And if you pick the lower of those levels, which you'd assume that it's not exactly true, but over a period of time of the recess, the playground noise is more or less constant. It doesn't vary, too much from 1 minute to the next. Whereas, so there's times when in those graphs, there's less ambient noise. For some reason, the traffic slowed down or whatever, there's less ambient noise. Those would be the more accurate times to try to pinpoint what the playground noise was. And when you do that, then that's not too far off from our predicted levels. Again, particularly when you apply a factor for just based on experience, my estimate was that the sound levels we were measuring were generally about 5 dB less than what the sound levels were saying, just based on how audible it was compared to the rest of the sound that we were measuring.
Can I ask you a question? You thought about, for example, have a speakers 38 feet up, and then measure the houses around whatever your measurement, and to see what the difference is. Then we will have some kind of baselines, understand whether it's lower or higher, so we don't need to worry about it. What the T-Mobile did before is they have when they want to build the towers, that time we were arguing on the public hearing, but they put something, the source is higher, then they can do some measurement. So you can just have a recorder of the kids' noises and broadcasting whatever the dB you're talking about, and just to see whether how far they traveled, and about it. Then we will have some actual noises to a comparison.
We could do that with the existing playground, but we couldn't simulate the new one because it's not built yet and we wouldn't have the parapet to.
Yeah, but I'm saying, so can you just go ahead and put it up that high?
You could, but it wouldn't be an accurate representation of what the sound level would be.
Because
Alex?
whatever is going higher, at that time, so all the barriers absorption are be gone, so it will travel further.
It would be louder.
It will be louder.
Yeah.
That's what we were concerned about.
Well, it would be louder, but it wouldn't be accurate.
Are you confident that your modeling takes into account all of the fencing and the foliage that you're going to? Is that where you're saying it would be
Yes.
louder because instead it wouldn't be surrounded by all of that?
But it's just arbitrary.
Is that what
It's
you're
not
saying? Okay.
arbitrary, but yeah, it doesn't have all of it doesn't represent the new playground well. We could do the existing playground because it's there, but we wouldn't be able to simulate the new playground well by doing that.
When you do the modeling on the walls, I'm saying on the mesh or the walls, fence, did you modeling how much absorption or how much all the sound traveling around there, or how did you do that?
We put in the buildings that were surrounding it, and we put in the fact they're hard materials. They're wood and glass and so forth. So we put in the hard materials that would represent the existing buildings.
No, I'm saying so for the 35 feet high when you're doing modeling.
Mm-hmm.
So when you do the modeling at that high, but you have some kind of sound barriers, right, around it?
Yes.
And you can modeling what kind of materials you use to
Mhm.
absorb sound that way.
Yes, we put those materials in too.
And Councilmember Nguyen, I think that's a really good point that I think goes back to what I said earlier, which is there will be in the special use permit, if the council chooses to adopt this, there will be a noise study that speaks specifically to the exact type of attenuation, barrier sound work, that screening. So this was done at the legislative level to sort of talk about the concept, and was done with sort of the best that is known now. But obviously, if the council chooses to adopt this and St. Thomas goes forward, there will be another study that goes exactly to what you're saying, which is the precise materiality and design of that parapet and the building. And that will be what's done at the special use permit noise study.
For the modeling, you can do it already, right, pretty much? Because you can just put the parameter and just run some computer time, come out at least we have some like 50% comfort level or 60% comfort level that you're good enough to handle the sound traffic, the sound propagation. Because it's the nature of the sound, you put it the higher, it's go farther away. And so the people who wouldn't hear today, they hear it later, then they get complaint. So if you have some ways of some designs how the sound travels, it's easy to model, right? You have the modeling, you can do that. And so at least we can see what is the situation.
Yeah, and I would say, and I think, Ms. Park and Mr. Yantek, I think that's the intent, and that was what was proven in this study. I think to your point in regard to the exact specifics, that's kind of why we're here at the council for the code amendment. In order to proceed with the special use permit and proceed with the building, we need the code amendment, which is why we're asking for the council's action. And then what I want to be very clear in conveying is this is not the end of the noise evaluation. This is the policy level to set the choice of, does the council want to support rooftop amendments? Do they want to support the opportunities for children to play on those facilities? And then there will be a project-specific review that will have this level of detail with this exact specifics. So I guess what I would encourage the council is, we were doing this as something that was asked to sort of give you that policy level of detail, but I would encourage, to think about it at that policy level with the comfort of knowing that there is a special use permit process that's going to apply to a specific building. Because as Steve and the city attorney will tell you, this is setting the policy for all 3 schools in the city, as opposed to one specific project.
Alex, did you want to speak?
I'm good, thanks.
Okay, other questions for the noise experts? Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, Christina?
Right, so that was discussion item 3. Discussion item 4 relates to hours of operation. This is on page 5 of Exhibit 3. The Planning Commission recommended the hours of 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. daily. One alternative proposal is to use the 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. hours of operation Monday through Friday, and then further restrict hours of operation on Saturday, Sunday, and city holidays to 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Mayor Atkins, you had asked Planning Commission Vice Chair Randy Reeves for his opinion on that alternative proposal, and he indicated that the Planning Commission felt the current proposal of 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. daily offered the best flexibility for programming and scheduling overall. St. Thomas School had originally requested these hours because they're consistent with current program hours, although they did state that winter hours are typically shorter due to shorter daylight hours overall.
May I ask a point of clarification? Doesn't Randy Reeves' children attend St. Thomas?
I don't recall.
They do. The reason. Yeah, he disclosed.
I know,
The
but that's not disclosed here until now, so thank you.
So there were a number of people on Planning Commission who had children there or previously had children there. I asked for clarification of a number of Planning Commission members because I wanted to make sure that my recollection was correct, that they had looked at this alternative proposal and they had rejected it, and they voted 7-0 to go with 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., and that was confirmed.
That's right.
Thank you.
Even on the weekends?
Yeah, and so the level of deference that we give to Planning Commission, I
What?
know we wanted to.
They
I think
did
it was that the
consider-
parks are open daylight
School
hours.
School is a different legal entity than the church.
They did consider, actually, I think several alternatives and voted 7-0 in favor of the 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. daily as their preferred option. All right. Item 5. Oh, sorry. Did you want to ask some questions?
The noise seemed to go off on a tangent of its own, but I think if we can stick with the general overview and then go through in detail from start to finish like we had planned, that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, the noise study presenting the third-party review, that's information that hadn't previously been available. I believe we received it only at the last minute, so just before packets were due.
I just misunderstood.
Anyway.
I thought we were.
I'm happy if you have any questions or, however you prefer to carry on.
Is council okay if we just go over this in general and then go back and do the specifics? Okay, thank you.
Right. So discussion item 5 is mitigation of impacts. This is Exhibit 3, pages 5 and also 7 to 8. So this is intended to entirely replace the original public amenities section, which is redlined out on pages 7 to 8. The new mitigation section on page 5 provides a method for identifying potential impacts and requiring specific mitigation that's related to and proportional to the identified impacts. And it primarily relies on studies prepared by qualified professionals and provided by an applicant for a rooftop play area. Item 6, required studies and analyses. So this ties in to the mitigation piece. It's Exhibit 3, pages 5 to 6. Staff, Planning Commission, and Council identified 3 primary impacts: noise, light and glare, and visual or aesthetic impacts. And these all have required studies in the new mitigation section. We do recognize that other impacts could be identified during the review process that might be unique to any given school or situation. And so we also included a provision for the director to require additional studies. As I mentioned, the studies have to be prepared by a qualified professional, provided by the applicant. We did allow for third-party review to be used to evaluate those studies and make sure that they are sound. And those approved studies would provide the basis for requiring appropriate mitigation. Item 7 is periodic review and enforcement, which is on page 6 of Exhibit 3. We have some alternatives for code language that would provide for a periodic review. Alternative 1 is evaluation that's initiated by the city. So in a set number of years, the city takes the initiative to go review the rooftop play area and make sure it's working appropriately. Alternative 2 is an automatic expiration of the permit after so many years, and a reevaluation through a new permit process is initiated by the applicant should they want to keep using that rooftop play area. This was another point clarified by the planning commissioners. They didn't have a discussion of the sunset clause option, did initially believe that the existing code enforcement provisions are sufficient to deal with any potential issues that might come up with the rooftop play area. Item number 8 is on page 7 of Exhibit 3. This was not specifically addressed by the Planning Commission in their recommendation, but is a potential impact to surrounding properties. Earlier discussions at the Planning Commission had a general understanding that any lighting would be for the stair and elevator, penthouse, required exit lighting, and similar, but wouldn't be used specifically to light the play area for play activities. Staff did have 2 potential language alternatives. Alternative 1 would be to require a lighting plan analysis and details for use of temporary light fixtures to light the play area for play, or alternative 2 would be prohibiting lighting except for that required for safe egress. And then the last issue is on setbacks, which is Exhibit 3, pages 3 to 4, and also pages 3 to 4 of the agenda bill. So I wrote a short analysis discussing how the code language that is in the Planning Commission recommendation is challenging to apply, just because there aren't any provisions addressing side or rear property lines. So, for example, the Bellevue Christian School east property line doesn't have a designated setback under the current proposal because it's not on a public right-of-way. It's not against a residential zone. It's against the municipal boundary. So there's no way to know what the setback there would be for a rooftop play area. And the setback from State Route 520 is also undefined. It's listed as the minimum in the MMC, but there's not any indication of exactly what that minimum is or where we would find that. So the application of setbacks in those specific instances, for example, is challenging. So I've recommended in my analysis that the language originally presented to the Planning Commission be used. It's consistent with other setback requirements for schools and clarifies issues related to undefined setbacks. Planning Commission was concerned about making sure that residential uses were still very well protected. So one option that I did identify was to have a setback of 150 feet from all property lines adjoining a public street or a residential use specifically, as opposed to a residential zoning district. Or potentially another alternative would be to add another line item requiring a smaller setback distance from specifically the state right-of-way zoning district. That would be another potential modification to consider.
I'm confused a little bit on the previous page. You say staff recommends the last line. The language originally presented to the Planning Commission. So are we now looking at Exhibit 2 or Exhibit 3? Because 3 is the one that is staff edited.
This one, so this edit didn't make it into Exhibit 3. So this is the language that I have recommended. And this is applicable for schools that are located only on a single lot. So this exception identified here is for schools located on multiple lots.
But where do we see this language? Is it Exhibit 3 or Exhibit 2?
Pretend that it's in Exhibit 3.
Pretend that it's in Exhibit 3. I apologize. I
Okay.
should have caught that.
That's my question.
But it is listed out in the agenda bill as well.
Okay.
This was in the original recommendation that the Planning Commission amended, and I didn't get it back into Exhibit 3.
Okay.
I apologize.
So Christine,
Yes,
and this,
Commissioner.
and it is a Greenway, it's a public park, so they are taking the public land, or what
So-
is this means? Because of this is where you're going to rezone.
Right.
Rezoned from public land to the private use, or what is it?
So what Commissioner Wen is looking at is Exhibit 1A, which identifies the proposed area to be rezoned.
Yeah.
And what that is a section of the Overlake Golf and Country Club property is being rezoned from the R20 brown colored zoning district to the public zone, which is where schools are allowed to be located. So in order for them to build a new school facility off-site on the area that they are leasing from the Overlake Golf and Country Club, they need to rezone it to public so that they can build that facility
So
there.
the school consider a public zone,
It's in the public zone, yes.
because it's a private school?
It is a private school. The public zone, so the zoning dictates how uses are allowed to be located within the city. Schools, public or private, are allowed to be located in the public zone. So the public zone includes schools and public parks. They're not necessarily only public uses. It's just what the zone was named. It's generally a public use. And it's,
Okay, so let's just follow the process, if that's okay. We'll go to comments from the public, unless there's something more you have for your staff report, and then we'll circle back with you with our specific questions.
I have nothing else.
Okay, thank you, Christina. So we'll move into public comments. Is there anybody who hasn't turned in a speaker card who'd like to be heard? Mr. Morrison?
Amy, would you be willing to turn on the overhead?
Yeah.
Just give it a second. Should
Perfect,
pop up.
there we go. Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the council. Ian Morrison for the record on behalf of St. Thomas. First, want to say thank you. Thank you to the council, thank you to commission, thank you to staff, both former planning director Grumbaugh and to Mr. Wilcox and Mr. Masal and Christina. This has been an incredible process. We think that throughout we came to you in November of last year asking to start this process about the gym and the rooftop play area, and we think that we've appreciated the dialogue. We've appreciated that this process has gotten better throughout. We were fully supportive of the Planning Commission's draft that was passed and recommended to you. We are even more supportive of the vast majority of staff's recommendations. I think this process is a function of how legislative action should work in our mind. It has gotten better, and so we want to thank you for your time. We know you have taken a lot of effort with that, so we appreciate your thoughtful dialogue. I think there are three things that we want to just offer. You've heard the noise piece, so I'll bracket that. But there are three pieces that we want to just offer you in the staff draft. First, we really support, and you'll hear from Dr. Wheeler in a second, the Planning Commission's 7-0 recommendation about the hours of operation. And Dr. Wheeler will talk to you about why flexibility on Saturday and Sunday is important to the school use. Secondly, I think the only thing, and we've talked to the city attorney about this, that we have a little concern about is subsection Q on page 6 of Exhibit 3, and that's the one that you just heard Christina talk about the sunset. We would fully support if the council wants to commit that the city will do a review of projects. We're supportive of that. However, I think that gives us great pause when you talk about giving a vested right, a special use permit to allow for a rooftop play area, excuse me, and then potentially taking that back, clawing that back and having that expire. I think when you think about that as a policy matter, that's kind of inconsistent with how land use permits are granted. And it's also something that adds a lot of uncertainty in the investments that these schools are making if it's something that is clawed back 15 or 10 years down the line. So that's the only piece, if we could offer a friendly amendment, is we would support the current language or alternative 1, but we think alternative 2 has some flaws from a land use standpoint. And then the last thing is just a very small thing, and this is in regards to subsection G at page 4, which is talking about the setbacks of certain areas from the exterior parapet wall. And the Planning Commission draft, which we think that Mr. Masal's drafting got better, the Planning Commission draft didn't contemplate planter boxes being in there. The goal, as you can see on this exhibit, is there would be a parapet from 30 feet to 35 feet that has that noise attenuation. There'd be a 3-foot setback for the fencing and obviously any playground equipment in there. But as we had contemplated, we thought that the planter boxes could go within that 3-foot setback. And there's a draft right now on subsection Q where planter boxes are included in that piece where it would be set back. So effectively what you're doing is you're constraining the area of the play area. And so we think the thing, and as we talk to planning commissioners, this is really trying to screen, and it's something that it's important to note. We anticipate this to be below the parapet. So we would ask for you to just strike that one reference to planter boxes out of subsection G on page 4. With that, I really appreciate your time and your effort, and we would ask that the council, ideally, if we get to a place where you may be comfortable taking action tonight, we'd welcome that. Otherwise, we'll look forward to talking to you in July. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morrison. Mr. Wheeler?
Good evening. Just for the record, my name is Kirk Wheeler. I'm the head of school at St. Thomas School. And I also want to start by thanking all of you throughout this process. I know it takes a tremendous amount of time. There's a lot of reports. There's a lot of reflection. And on behalf of all of our students, I really appreciate that you continue to move this process forward. I'll be brief. Over the last 6 months, we've worked really well with the Planning Commission to develop a code solution that we believe is thoughtful, balanced, and comprehensive. And overall, we think the Planning Commission's recommendation meets those goals by these following. Allowing all St. Thomas School students to have the opportunity to enjoy safe, on-site, outdoor recreational activities, supporting St. Thomas School's educational mission, ensuring that the St. Thomas School Gym Theater building will have a minimal impact on neighbors through imposing strenuous landscaping, noise, and lighting standards, and avoiding unintended consequences by expressly limiting the additional height and setbacks to school uses, not to any other uses in the city, such as residential. I wanted to touch on just a couple of more items that had bubbled up over the last couple of conversations. 1, hours of operation. I appreciate that this has come back in terms of maintaining the original intent, which was keeping basically 7 days a week with the 8 to 6 hours of operation. That's consistent with the types of activities that we run. Beginning much later, for example, on a Saturday morning would really have an impact in terms of activities that we're able to run on those days. So that consistency is much appreciated. I also wanted to just touch base on what seems to be some questions, conversations around distribution of students. The school is near capacity in terms of what we intend to have our target enrollments. And so when you think about any additional students coming into the school over the next 3, 5, 10 years, there's not many, quite honestly. Most of our grades are filled. And so picture 2 students at this grade, 5 students at that grade, 4 at another grade. So pretty minimal impact in terms of future growth and the impact on noise. I would also ask you to envision those recesses now distributing students among 2 different playgrounds. I just wanted to make sure that the concept that was emerging wasn't that, oh gosh, we can now double the number of students that are out at recess. It's rather about redistributing where they are. And then I guess I would wrap around that also. Picture that same number. If we weren't actually building a building, we would have the same moderate enrollment growth over the next 5 to 10 years, but we wouldn't be having any conversations around playground noise because children are out playing, they're making noise. So it's actually a benefit to the city that we're moving a portion of these students up onto a rooftop playground that has very specifically been designed, will be designed acoustically, and we'll be really working hard to be a good neighbor and to address those noise issues. So that's really has been our commitment from the very beginning, is to make sure that we're really doing all that we can to go above and beyond with those sounds. And I guess the last thing that I would just add is, this is really about supporting schools. And when you think about, not just St. Thomas School, it's the 3 schools that are in Medina, and future of these schools, you're supporting children, you're supporting education, and I think that there's certainly, from my opinion, being head of school at St. Thomas School, truly nothing more important that we're doing as a community. So I very much appreciate, again, your time and your efforts on behalf of not just St. Thomas School, but all the schools that are in Medina.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Haggerty.
Hi, my name's Mark Haggerty. I live at 7648 Northeast 10th Street. I've been a resident of Medina since 1995, and I'm the current president of Overlake Golf and Country Club. And I've been involved in this process for 3 years. And I do want to thank the school, because when we first started this process, we were not excited at all about this. Because what they were proposing, we had 3 key points in order to even consider this. The first point was that it would not interrupt our maintenance operations of our golf course, our #1 asset that we have around here for us personally. The other part was to make sure that the sight lines, I don't know if you guys have been to the new remodeled clubhouse, but we've finally taken advantage of our territorial views to the east and the south, which we never did before. And we did not want to stare at a giant fence and a giant building off in the distance. And then the third thing that was very important was the sound mitigation. We wanted to make sure that it wasn't going to affect our experiences. We have 2 or 3 holes that are right around there. And we have to remember we have a school down there now, and we have a park right across the street. So we get quite a bit of that sound, and it's happy sound. That's a good thing, but we didn't want too much happy. So we've worked, the school worked diligently. They've been through a number of different designs. I mean, this is all based on renderings and concepts. And one thing that we found out in this process, we think we came up, the operations, it doesn't concern you guys, but the operations, that we think we came up with a more efficient plan. They brought in experts, transportation experts, make sure turning radiuses and all that kind of stuff were taken into effect. And but those parts of looking in the views were very, very important. And as you see, or you saw with the picture before, that fence and the plantings up there are a big deal. And we're going to be involved in this process going forward. It's not we're done if they get approved. We're not going to completely constrain their project, but they know what we expect. And there's quite a bit that has to be done in order to do that. So one of the things the board was, and we still haven't voted on it, we're getting close. It's all legalese, trying to get through all of this. Very close. But the board wasn't, because we're representing 400 equity members, we said we're not going to just make this decision. So we went out, we did 2 town halls with our members and sent out information to everybody. And then we did an advisory vote from our membership. And of those responses, 81% said thumbs up. So I think we vetted this thing very properly. We have a lot to go forward with, but we're excited about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Nordstrom?
Hi, I'm Glenn Nordstrom. For the record, I'm a Hunts Point resident, but I was a Medina resident for years. I also served on the town council, planning commission, for 6 years in Hunts Point, and my husband served for 7 years on the town council. So we know the process, and I really thank you all for your time and your commitment to our community and the planning commission to their commitment as well to the community. My husband and I have been a St. Thomas family for 19 years. I currently serve as the chair of the board, and this has been a really tremendous process of being great neighbors. I appreciate Mark being here. And as a 67-year-old school in the community and great neighbors with the church that we started from, we really, with the 3 schools that we have here, we want to be just one of those great neighbors and a really shining light as our other 2 schools are. We're really thankful that Medina has 3 terrific schools, and I can say from having 4 children go through St. Thomas and then on to Bellevue High School, I see what happens with the great foundation that we have. And my kids all are in school with St. Thomas kids in high school and Medina and Santa Barbara, Bellevue Christian School. Anyway, we've really worked hard, and we want to be great neighbors. And I just encourage you. I know the pressure you all are under to make the right decision for the community, but I do encourage you to look at the big picture of the steps that we've gone through, the work that we've done with our community, and really the point that we want to be great neighbors, and we've done a lot of work to be able to do that. And again, thank you all for your time, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Leslie Person?
Good evening. I will be very, very brief. For the record, my name is Leslie Person. I am a resident of the city of Medina. I am also a current St. Thomas parent. I also do want to thank you for your time and your efforts in undertaking this. I know it's been a long process and one that sounds like it has been extremely involved and thought out by all parties. My kids have been at St. Thomas for the better part of 4 years now, and it's been an amazing experience to watch them grow from very tiny kids into bigger kids and on their way up as they go. And the reason that we chose to send our kids there is because of the values and the commitment to learning across the board that St. Thomas provides for them. It's not just about the education that they get in the classroom, but it's also about the leadership opportunities that they get, and that extends beyond just the technology aspect of learning or math and science and the sort of traditional curriculum. It also extends to the athletics and the theater opportunities and the facilities provided for them to be able to do that. So I think that it's important to take that into consideration as you consider this amendment. I would urge you to make these amendments to the code for the betterment of St. Thomas, but also for the other two schools that are here in our wonderful community. And as you do that, I hope you consider that the sound of children playing is also the sound of children learning, and that's something that we should all be very, very supportive of. Thank you.
Thank you. Rebecca Andrew?
For the record, my name's Rebecca Andrew, and I'm a resident of Medina. I've lived here now for 5.5 years, and this is the place we have chosen to raise our children. I asked my children before coming here what living in Medina meant to them, and these are their words. They're 11, 9, and 6. They said happy. They're surrounded by kind people. It's naturally beautiful. They feel loved. They feel safe. They feel protected, and they feel like it's a neighbourhood. My children, I have 3 children at St. Thomas. They've been there for 5 years, and now STS is their family away from their family. As this year's PA president and now a trustee on the board, I have evidenced the thoughtfulness and thoroughness that school has gone through to reach this point. School opens its doors for an open house, and then we held a second open house here in this very room, and no one from within our beautiful city has raised any objections to date. I also presented to the Planning Commission in February, and so I'm very appreciative of the amazing work that Sean and his committee have done to date in crafting the language that allows St. Thomas to continue to educate local children, as well as protecting the very real concerns and interests of our neighbours. St. Thomas School is committed to ensuring everyone around us is happy with our plans. I strongly support the proposed St. Thomas rooftop play area, gym and theatre, as it will serve both St. Thomas School students and our local community. I thank you for your time and your consideration, and I urge you to approve our code amendment. Many thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Lent?
Good evening. My name is Brian Lent, and we are property owners in Medina. We're currently building a new home. We currently live in Bellevue, so we're excited to move the family to Medina with my wife and 3 kids. Nicole's 7, Rachel's 5, and Gavin's 2. Our 2 oldest go to St. Thomas currently. And there's a lot of reasons we picked Medina. The ones I want to highlight to some degree are actually just this. In my view, how often can you go into a city planning meeting and have such a personal interconnect with the staff? You know, we've gotten a great appreciation for both getting to know city leaders, staff, emergency responders in the process of building the home. And it feels like we as individuals can have quite a bit of impact within the city, which feels very much like family. And I think a lot of the investments the city has made over the past several decades, feels like it's kept Medina a very family-friendly place. So we're very excited about it. We're obviously in full support of the code amendments that you have before you. I've myself participated in multiple planning commission meetings, been able to provide some feedback and testimony. I think they've also done a lot of great work, especially given the timings, which I didn't necessarily appreciate how short that's been. The only one change I would personally like to see put back that was taken out in some of the languages to allow permanent play structures. So when they showed the picture like a swing set, I don't know if that's considered structure or not, but that seemed to be removed in some of the language. So it's just something I'd ask to take a look at because kids like to be on swings. I think you're familiar with a lot of the stats. One that really hit home for me when this came up at the school is that St. Thomas has about 50% of the playground space per student in comparison to Medina Elementary and 38% when compared to Bellevue Christian. So hopefully this gives students more geographic space to be able to play. We're also excited that St. Thomas will continue to hold its annual camp fair as well as I think for over 1,000 students, the summer camps that happen, and a lot of people from the community participate in that. There's also something that wasn't mentioned in this that I think is important. That's the rooftop playground also opens up, the gym would move, so that opens up more classroom learning space. So what the school has planned for using that space is actually very helpful for being able to see the older classes, the ones, again, in middle school, be able to be larger in size. So that's, for us, a big benefit, hoping to be long-term members. So I just wanted to thank, in particular, Planning Commission for the work they did, and frankly, for putting up with a lot of us, probably St. Thomas, but us and the public, and offering lots of comments and criticism. Obviously, for the City Council, and hopefully your affirmative vote, whether it's taken now or in July. I also separately want to thank Mayor Atkins, as well as Ryan and Mike, for a recent quick decision to stop using Roundup within the city. Given there's other parents here, I wanted to mention that. There's more research coming out recently about the Roundup containing glyphosate, which is starting to become known as a carcinogen. So I wanted to thank her for this opportunity for discontinuing that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just to clarify, I'm just the one who passed along the decision. It was these two you need to thank. So thank you, Ryan, and thank you, Mike. I was just passing along the information. So, Mike, it's freezing in here. Is there a way to turn that fan down?
Absolutely.
I know, it's freezing people out. Well, I am too, but they're freezing to death. So.
It's turned off.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, council blankets, that'll be the next thing. Mr. Schubring, Mr. Nelson, did you want to make any comments before we start council discussion? Can you come up here so we can get you on so everybody else can hear you too?
Talking about all of the different pieces of the decibel levels in that. And so just a definition to kind of help make the numbers mean something. An increase of 3 decibels, or 3 decibels doubles the sound intensity, but a 10 decibel increase is required before the sound is perceived to be twice as loud. Therefore, a small increase in decibels represents a large increase in intensity. Think of a train horn. We can hear the train horn down in Boeing when they're putting the cars in at Boeing, all the way up here. That's very intense. Kids in all this, they're talking, I think I heard 5 or 7 decibels. So 3 decibels doubles the loudness of it, but it's not the intensity. So kind of trying to put some of this together. Another one was what we use in all these industries is LEQ and LMAX. So equivalent is you take a period. I think these are, it's like they're 20-minute periods. So over 20 minutes, what's the average? So you might, again, we'll use trains because it doesn't have anything to do with this, and I have more experience with it. But one train whistle blowing in 20 minutes will take it up to 120 decibels, but the equivalent over the whole time might only be 70. So that's kind of what we're going here with the kids, is how much noise there, and then the L max would be that one event where maybe a whole bunch of kids kick the ball and somebody scores a goal and they all scream. You're going to have, that's the one max versus the equivalent of the whole thing. But what they're really saying with all the numbers when they're on the hill, not on the hill down here, was the 5 to 7 decibels. It's not an airplane going by. So again, I think you might look into a little bit of definitions about what this means. The questions that were coming up, I don't know that that was clear, that you understood how the difference between the decibels, doubling the noise versus the intensity. And then, well, that was it. I didn't want to sway the vote, just kind of say, it took a long time, but that's what should have been said first, was what they were presenting in definitions.
Sorry,
Yes.
a minor correction. A 3 decibel in difference, in increase, is noticeable. A 1 decibel or 2 decibel, we cannot notice the difference. So at 3, you notice the difference. To double it, you have to go by 10.
Well, 10 doubles the intensity,
Right.
3 doubles the sound. And it's like in voltage or current, it's different
So
measurements.
that change of 3 that was I
Right.
was asking for is barely noticeable.
Correct.
If it was below 3, you couldn't tell the difference.
There you go. But it was that way so that you know what's really happening with it is
Oh, thank you.
that part there.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Nelson, did you want to be heard? Okay, thank you very much. So let's move now into council members' questions to any speakers or to staff. Alex?
We have too many options. We have the Exhibit 2, Exhibit 3. Do you mind if we start with a motion with amendments and then we go over that and do a discussion?
Yes,
Of
do
the
you want to make a
motion?
motion?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, before we do that, can we
Yeah.
do questions? Or,
Well, he's saying do
I'd
the
like to
motion
make a
first,
motion
you make a motion, and then it's
with
seconded,
amendments,
and then
we
you start
discuss it.
thank
discussion.
you. Thanks, Alex.
I thought this was a public hearing and we vote next month.
No, my motion is to direct
Just
staff
starts discussion.
to adopt, so the motion is to direct staff to adopt the staff edited version of the Exhibit 3, not Exhibit 2, with the following amendments. I have 4 amendments to list. So they're not considered amendments, it's one motion that includes 4 points.
Got it.
The first point is clause B3J, which would recommend, which would read the use of the rooftop play area should be limited to the hours of 8 to 6 daily, to keep it that way, instead of the other alternative that says excluding weekends. So to keep it 8 to 6 on a daily basis.
Okay.
That's number 1. Number 2 is remove the clause B3Q, which includes 2 alternatives. The one that director checks the rooftop every 5 years, or alternative 2. I'm suggesting to remove clause B3Q completely.
Okay.
And the third one is adopt alternative 2 in clause F4, which talks about the lighting on the rooftop, but to add a clause that says except for safety lighting of stair and elevator penthouses. And the last one is the one that was just mentioned now, item G on page 5, remove the planter boxes. No restriction on the planter boxes.
Okay, it's been moved by Mr. Marcos that staff be directed to adapt the staff version as follows, with the following amendments. Clause B3J would show the hours of operation from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Clause B3Q would be removed in its entirety. Clause F4 regarding lighting would be revised to say that there's no lighting except for safety purposes for elevators and stairs. I may not have gotten that wording completely right. And 4G is to remove the planter boxes from the setback because it then would fail to meet its purpose of screening and noise impacts. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Shereen.
Could I-
Discussion.
Could I just ask one
Yes.
question? I just want to make sure that the clerk got that. Did you get all that, Amy? or-
I got about half of it, and I'll just ask.
Okay, we got-
You did? Okay, it's just to be clear, Amy, what I printed out of the PDF sometimes has the I becomes J versus the iPad that we have. So the I versus J or the G versus H are not exactly what I just stated. So you have to refer to the PDF.
I got that, yes.
That's why I said the description as well.
Sorry for the interruption. I just kind of want to make sure we get.
No, I appreciate that. That's what you're here for. Thank you. Okay, now let's open it up for discussion. Would you prefer to go, should we go in order?
Well, would you like to go over by the changes that I proposed, or you want to go over the entire Exhibit 3 with the staff edits, which has all these red lines? It's up to you.
It's your motion. Let's go over your changes.
Okay, so if we go over my changes, the first one was the 8 to 6 hours daily. We heard from the school that they would rather do that, and Saturday and Sunday for them are also important. And I understand the Planning Commission also recommended 7 to 0 to have it 8 to 6. So if there is no objection to that one, I would like to keep it 8 to 6 daily.
Okay, any discussion from council members?
So this is where I have a question for some of the speakers. Is this where I can ask questions to the speakers? So for Mr. Haggerty from Overlake, just curious, for Sundays, any opinions on 8 to 6 on Sundays versus the rest of the week?
We feel that the sound mitigation from the plan they have is going to be that'll be the noise, the worst case scenario, so we have no.
So you're fine? All right, thank you.
Anyone else?
Question for the school. Are you currently using the playground during the hours 8 to 10 on Saturday mornings?
Yeah, part of why we wanted to keep it consistent is we already have activities that run at those times.
And they're currently using the outdoor space?
Correct.
And have there been any complaints from the neighbors that you know of about any of that, or everyone's?
There have not been.
I guess I have a follow-up question on that as well. So how about on Sundays? What's the typical usage of the school on Sundays?
It depends on when we're able to sometimes schedule games. Sometimes that's when we actually allow the church to use some of our outdoor play space.
Okay, thank you.
Any other discussion about the hours of operation? I agree with you, Alex. I think the consistency and also just giving some deference to the Planning Commission because they went through this a number of times and that's where they unanimously.
Right, but I guess my discussion is in part, it's not just St. Thomas, this amendment, right? So, I guess other schools could be private or public, and have less control, so.
But this is the code for all schools. So if we're okay with 8 to 6 at St. Thomas, we should be okay 8 to 6 at Bellevue Christian and Medina Elementary. I don't see why it should be any different.
Right, and that's exactly what I want to think about
Yeah.
is, you know, with St. Thomas, we consider where they are in the church and all that, but I don't want to fall into, because it's okay at St. Thomas, it's automatically Woodward Health.
Thank you for the reminder.
That's a good point, though. Yeah.
So I live more towards the Medina Public School and it's packed all weekend long. I don't know about the.
Bellevue Christian is not.
Bellevue Christian is not.
No.
Yeah, so this is in demand and there's, you know, the public school, there's not enough space for them. I know it's constantly in demand. Okay, Alex, what's next?
The next one was the item B3Q, the one that has two alternatives. One allowing the director to evaluate the rooftop within 5 to 10 years. And my opinion is once you have a vested code, you just don't make changes after that. So it should be complaint driven in the future. If the golf course or the neighbors are complaining in a year or 2 years or 5 years about something that is not what was expected, then the city might be able to check it out. But I don't think we can ask the school to come every 5 years or every 10 years to renew their permit or do the same thing that we're doing right now.
Okay, discussion?
So so if that was to be removed, then could someone remind me what's the enforcement mechanism here then?
Well, my interpretation is just like any building permit, any air condition that you build where you have to put something to attenuate the sound. The city does not go check on it every 5 years,
Right.
unless somebody does something wrong and then neighbors complain. it should be any different than
Got it.
other
Thank you.
construction.
Thank you.
Christina or Scott, can you speak to, wouldn't it just be a complaint-driven?
Complaint-driven
Yeah,
process, yeah.
Complaint-driven is fine. It's what all cities do, and there are other code provisions in your code that give the director ability to enforce conditions of permit approval, whether it's 5 years, 10 years, or 20 years down the line. So conditions are conditions. These were just proposed as alternatives for the council to consider if it wanted more control over the experimental nature of rooftop play areas. It's not what the council wants, it's up to the council.
I have a question. I didn't read the planning commission proposal. Do we have a limit how much sound they can generate? Because if you talk about compliance, you need to have levels so they comply with the standards. But do we have a standards in there? How much they can generate?
There is a citywide noise chapter that defines what noise is permitted and not permitted. If the proposal that's before you is ultimately adopted roughly in its form, the applicant would have to prepare noise studies modeling what the noise is going to be, and I imagine that the director would then require as conditions of approval that they have to meet or stay within certain noise standards, and that would be part of their operational requirements.
So does that mean when we, that it's a condition of certificate of occupancy? Like, is it?
Yes, more or less.
A permit, right? And
Yeah.
so you comply with whatever the city's regulation, you'll make sure it meet, and then we give you the permit, and then that's it, right? So, and then afterwards, it complaint driven, right?
Correct.
David? You look like you might have a question.
It's just more of a, so this, it just becomes, from a legal standpoint, it becomes grandfathered in without the additional 5 to 10 year review. Is that the case?
Yeah, from a purely legal perspective, you can define what an applicant vests to, and they can vest to a perpetual use. Sometimes uses are, like variances, are personal to the operator of the property, and when the operator sells the property, the variance goes away. And you can do the same thing here with a time-limited use, and they would become vested to that use for that fixed period of time, and then they would have to reapply for it. And the enforcement thing is the same way. But it's not common, but it is an alternative that some cities use in some circumstances when they're not sure what the real impacts are going to be of something they want to do, and they want to try it without vesting somebody in perpetuity to do something. That's all that it was meant for.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Discussion?
I may be the only one, but it appeals to me because I have no idea what my neighbors are going to say when they find out about this. And it's not very clear to me that the community at large is aware that this is happening. And I don't think it means that, I think there would be a bias in favor of allowing it to continue as long as it were operated as expected. So I'm just going to throw that out there, that I don't think it's unfair to look at it again. I also think it is a different, things could look different in 5 years or 10 years.
I had a related question back to the head of school. What's the current enrollment right now? 332?
We're at 332. We're projecting 340 next year.
What's the maximum enrollment?
Our target enrollment is 360.
Okay, thank you.
And kind of just for clarity, and even more so for the record, the special use permit that the school is established under right now has a code or a special use permit condition of 395 students. So that's what's established for the special use permit.
Thank you.
So I think both Alex and Jessica make good points. I would tend to go more with enforcement as opposed to having to make someone invest this much money to build a building and then to potentially have to reapply with a new code and then
But the
potentially
only
have to
impact would
remove
be-
their building. That seems pretty harsh to me. So I think the Planning Commission did a good job from my perspective of trying to build in, the lighting impacts, the noise impacts, make sure that there's mitigation. And to me, that's what land use is all about, is trying to mitigate the impacts on the community. And so if we're in favor of, if the majority of us are in favor of a rooftop play area, it seems to me the emphasis is not in creating a process here where they either come back at a certain amount of time to come together to determine compliance, or make them come back sunset after 10 or 15 years and then make them come back with a new application. Instead, it should be compliance all along, so that if any time somebody complains, Steve can go look and see whether or not they're compliant, and if they're not, then there should be an enforcement action brought right then.
I disagree, because the issue isn't the building. The building would not have to come down. The issue would be whether or not the playground remains up there. And so I just, not that I agree or disagree about 5 years or whatever, it's just the enforcement or the impact would be on the playground, not the building. The second thing is, because I haven't had a chance, is we haven't talked about the height. What is the height of that building relative to the average building in Medina? Like, how tall is Medina Elementary? I think that's probably one of our tallest buildings. And what will it look like on the landscape? I mean, we're not an urban city, and 35 to almost 50 feet is pretty tall. So we haven't talked about that, and I'd like to know more about what that would look like on the landscape, that would look like, on 84th, and what that would look like for neighbors, not just Overlake.
So do you want to talk a little bit about the visual and viewshed analysis, or Alex, do you want to keep going with yours?
No, I mean, this is part of the
Okay.
Exhibit 3. I think Jen is posing a question which is covered in the maximum height under item number 2.
But
So
that-
it
I don't know what it
specifies
looks like.
35. So you want to discuss that?
The height is 35, and then you have
A
additional.
15 additional, up to
Yeah.
15 maximum.
Yeah,
Right.
that's a tall building in Medina.
So the proponent, St. Thomas School, has actually provided some renderings, and it's a little difficult to see here. Oops. But this white outline is the approximate massing of their proposed structure. The way that they have it proposed is that the building itself would be 30 feet tall with a 5-foot tall parapet, so the actual play surface would be at 30 feet. So that's what's represented here by this little outline, and this photo is taken from the 8th hole green on the Overlake Golf Course.
And Christina, didn't you recommend, in fact, in your markup that the soundproofing the ground had to be at 30 feet? I'm looking for it.
Yes, so go ahead. The Planning Commission did consider that and did choose to, in their code language construction, they chose not to allow the play surface itself to extend above the 35-foot height bonus, or 35-foot height limit. So the actual play surface has to be lower. The only things that are allowed to project into the space above that 35-foot height limit are the fencing, the stair and elevator, penthouse, vegetation, and I think that is the limit of permanent structures.
Right, okay, thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, I would agree. I had one question on the diagram with the white outline against the eighth green. Is the white outline include the height bonus above 35 feet, or is that the 35-foot height limit shown?
It includes it. The part that pokes up there is actually the top of the penthouse?
The top of the fencing?
Yeah.
So that would be 30 feet plus 15 feet. So that would,
Trees are 80, 90 feet tall.
Yeah.
got it, okay.
Where's the April green? For those of us who are not familiar with the,
24. I mean, fall. Federal, fall.
So it's, bear with me, council member. So it's. So, here, if I'm correct, right? So that's the 8-hole green. And there's one other concept that we've shared.
Before you take that away?
Yeah.
So point to the building, the new building.
So this is the new building, so this is showing the delta or the distance between the nearest property, residential property in Medina and also the nearest property there. But this orangish footprint here is the footprint of the new gym with the rooftop. I think it may,
What is the white one here?
that's the existing school.
That's
So you
the
can
school.
see when Mr. Yanta was talking and Dr. Wheeler was talking about how the existing play area is here. So this is the existing school, existing church, existing play area.
How tall are the existing school buildings?
35 feet.
35 feet?
35 feet. So for context, if I may, Mayor, may I?
Please.
One of the things that we showed to the planning commission so often that they got sick of it, so I apologize if we were freezing over here. This, I think, is the best encapsulation of what the proposed rendering is like, and obviously this is still a concept, but you can see here, and Bill, if you want to weigh in, so this is set back from the current property line, and then you can see this right here would be the elevator overrun, and it's hard to read right now, but you see this fencing, and then there's the line of something that's like an arborvitae that runs around the exterior of that. So that's the concept, and Councilmember Garone, the play area would be 35 feet, so the play area would be at 30 feet. So the parapet would be at 35, which is the current maximum for heights. So the only piece, I think it's important to note, as Christina and Ms. Hay were saying, the only pieces that are going above that are the open mesh fencing that will, per the conditions of the code, be screened in a manner to not be to be visible, and then we'll have landscaping in front of them, and then the stair and penthouse overruns.
What is the white building in the corner with the reddish roof?
Are you talking about this?
No. The new building. There's two, that,
Oh, the second penthouse?
yeah,
Yeah.
what is that?
So that's a stair overrun.
Okay.
And as this, from this version, I think actually this version may be a concept that, so the planning commission, and we supported it, said that your total stair and elevator overruns can be 600 feet maximum. So it's likely that this actually would go away because I believe that this modeled elevator overrun is approximately 600 feet. So this stair, if the code is adopted as proposed by council right now, this would likely go away and would be an open stair, so there would be no overrun.
Okay, thank you.
and do you have a rendering like how Medina residents not on the golf course would see it? So for example, from the path down on 80th in front of the condos, or from 12th Street, or, and particularly in the winter because many of those are deciduous trees.
So currently, Councilmember Rossman, we do not. These are the two renderings we have. One of the things that's contemplated in your view study, should you choose to adopt this code and go through the special use permit, the applicant and the city would have to negotiate where are the points that the view study would be taken. So I think that's, definitely something that maybe is something that would be advisable for the special use permit of saying, hey, certain distances away. Because again, what we have modeled or just shown for concept is, you're 600 plus feet away from the residential property lines, but I think your point is well taken about maybe what should those look like. Also a good point of maybe choosing some of the times of the year that you would choose to model a summer and a winter time to sort of show tree cover. Those are all good ideas.
Okay, but not in existence at this time.
No.
You have another, you have one direct from the west.
Oh, so this might help a little bit. Very good point. Thank you. So this is from the fairway, and you can start to see here, I think in this concept, So here's the existing building, and you can start to see where obviously on the southern end, you've got the existing cover, and then you start to see how that landscaping cover would operate to ideally, when it's at full maturity, screen. So again, it looks like a visual cover throughout.
So just to be clear, those are the trees on the building at 30 feet?
These here are the trees on the building, correct, Councilmember Frye?
Thank you.
And are they scaled so that the trees are 15 feet tall, obscuring the?
10 feet.
They're 10 feet.
We think that the netting needs to be either 12 or 14. There's some debate among our safety people, but the trees are scaled at 10 feet.
All right, I was just trying to get proportion.
We're not confident we can get trees to grow exactly to the top of the netting, so.
More fertilizer.
But it's important to know from our standpoint at the golf course, they're not going to be 2-foot trees.
They're not going to be what?
They're not going to be 2-foot trees. They're going to
Right.
start out as
Well,
fairly mature.
and the code as written requires the trees to be up to the top of the meshing. So however tall the mesh is the height that you need to obscure.
So you had asked about the view shed analysis. Did you still want me to address that?
Well, I just wanted to understand, as a part of the application, so not the legislative part, but when they actually apply, if we were to adopt this, they would have to do the view shed analysis and submit reports,
That's right.
and then they would have to mitigate to address any impacts.
Yes, and the way that the code is currently written, all of the viewpoints, the perspectives that are rendered have to be mutually agreed to by the city and the applicant. So we're not going to get a useless perspective. We're going to get something that helps us make a good decision for the community. Well, helps the hearing examiner make a good decision for the community. Special use permit goes to hearing examiner. But,
Can I ask another question?
Of course.
Thank you. So regarding the parapet, maybe this is a question for Sean Schubring. Is the limit 5 feet? Is that what I heard just recently?
Everywhere, top of the playground is 30, top of the wall, the parapet is 35. And then the netting, 12
Sure.
to 14.
An extra 9 or 10, okay.
Correct.
Right.
And then the tallest, it becomes basically the tallest point that is the top of the elevator.
Thank you. Kind of what I was getting at is if the kids are 4.5 feet tall, the parapet's 5, and I'm being sensitive to Ms. Rossman's questions about noise. I was curious about what does an extra foot of parapet do to noise? Maybe the sound expert has a comment on that, but sounds like the question's moot since the maximum is 5 feet anyway. Is that pretty much where we're at, I guess? It's 5 feet is 5 feet. Okay, thank you.
It could be taller if you wanted it taller for noise mitigation purposes.
Just putting it out there. I mean, that's kind of my question. So what does a foot of parapet do in terms of sound mitigation or noise mitigation? Do we know? Is there a standard formula? All right.
Well, there's a standard formula, but we'd have to run it through the model. It'd be,
Okay.
it could either be a little bit of difference, probably not a lot of difference, but it could be a little bit of difference. A little bit, dB or two, most likely.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
You
So,
would exceed the 35 feet high if you
Right.
increase it by,
Right.
make it 6 feet instead.
Got it.
36.
right, that's kind of my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions for Christine on this point? Okay, let's move along then to clause F4, the lighting.
So on F4, I'm proposing to adopt alternative 2, which is the lighting of the rooftop play areas is not allowed except for safety lighting of stair and elevator penthouses.
And that's consistent with what Planning Commission, their early discussions, and I believe, Sean, didn't, the applicant, I know there's going to be 3 schools, but at least this applicant was fine with no lighting except for safety purposes, right?
They were fine with it, and then what we discovered and decided was, you don't need it. You're not gonna have midnight playgrounds. We don't let it, this code, the other parts of the code, you can't play over at midnight, you can't go to Bellevue Christian at midnight. So it's already it's part of the code in a different place.
Yeah, it seems more protective to do what Alex is recommending, so.
Yeah, but the question maybe to Steve is that maybe there are code fire safety that you do have to have some light,
I would
right?
use the word exiting.
Exit light.
Exiting rather than
Right.
identifying a stair or elevator. That's the entire exit system that we need to protect, and it might be some low-level light, even down to 1-foot candle might be required. Depends upon what the design looks like. I haven't seen it yet, but certainly the exits are going to have to be lit.
Okay.
So I think we can say by consensus that we definitely want there to be lighting that's necessary for safety purposes, so you guys can come up with the magic language if we didn't get it quite, right, or safety.
Okay.
Okay. And then for,
And the last one was the planter boxes under G. That
Yeah.
they are planning to have planter boxes where the trees are planted, so they shouldn't be pushed away from the setback, because that's the purpose of the planter box, it sounds like. Am I correct?
yeah, I think they were saying it doesn't make any sense to push the planter boxes 3 feet away from the wall because they're supposed to be
Right.
screening the fence.
They don't have dirt up on the roof. They have to have some way for the plants to grow. So they become a planter box of some form of plants. Whether it's a permanent piece of the building, more what they propose, which is actual boxes that plants grow in. They're not gonna cover the top. How would you hold dirt back? We're saying you want plants, but you gotta have a way to make them grow.
Well, but I think the question here is, do we want the plants to look like one solid edifice with the edge of the building, or do we want more of a wedding cake look where the plants are further away?
And that depends on the parapet, because in this proposed design, the planter boxes would be behind the parapet.
So
Right.
how about make it taller so you
But-
get more sunshine?
But the question is, are the planter boxes that we are trying to hide, or the trees in the planter boxes where we don't want them to be too uniform?
I'm going to let Steve answer after I do, but my understanding is that it was important originally that anything on a rooftop be set back 3 feet, including the parapet, for the purpose of staging the wedding cake look. That's what, well, that may be wrong, but that's what I understood, and I was going to let Steve talk to it, if he knows.
For safety purposes, it doesn't need to be set back. We're just looking at the height of the parapet wall, and it's
Right.
only 42 inches, so it's fine.
Mr.
Well,
Nelson?
Can I say something?
Scott, sorry to interrupt you. I just think it's important to get
No,
the
no, no.
background because we don't have it.
No worries.
So, Mark Nelson, I think originally had the planter a little bit wider, and we I think we agreed that 3 foot was all we needed just to get decent plants. What we wanted to do was to hide the elevator and the stair penthouse units, and the idea of having the landscaping right up against that parapet made sense to us, and I think that's what we recommended. So whether or not, like, this is a planter here, or if it's sitting in pots over here, those need to be right up against the building to help screen the fence, the netting, and everything else. So what we agreed to was we'd have 3 feet of landscaping right on the other side of this parapet. That also helps to stop the noise and filter some of the noise as well. So we don't want the planters moved in 3 feet. We want them right against the building. That was the original intent that we had. So,
Okay, thank you. Questions for Mr. Nelson on that?
And you have a screen after the planters, right?
yes,
So if you move the planters, you're gonna move the screen,
Yes.
which means the play area will be smaller.
smaller,
Which defeats the purpose, so I don't see why
yes,
we wanna do that.
right.
May I ask you a question? If the play surface was actually at 35 feet and not 30 feet, and thus there was no parapet there, would you want the planters right at the edge of the building? Did the planning commission talk about that? Because this is a specific design, but the code allows you to put the play area surface at actually 35 feet.
Well, I don't think we ever intended that to happen at all.
Again, no, listen to what he said. What he's saying is the code
I know what he's saying.
we're taking a rendering that's not what they presented. This is just their idea that they're giving us to help us with this code amendment. The truth is, they can put
think the discussion went to safety, and it was told that they couldn't put it up there because there wouldn't be enough room to put the
But
safety
if you put
fencing.
it at 35, then your stairs have to go another 15 on top of that, so now you're at 50. It doesn't make sense.
The fencing becomes a safety component.
Yeah, so if I may, Madam Mayor, I think one of the things that in what I think was overall a very good sort of reframing and re-clarifying of the code, I think the issue from our perspective is when it was Director Grumbach, there was sort of a conversation that his read of the code is that maybe the planter boxes were not necessarily structures. You know, we've had sort of a conversation where we think for good draftspersonship that we should put them in there. The real issue with subsection G is before, when it was at the Planning Commission, this section was talking about areas that are projecting above the 35-foot height, and those need to be set back 3 feet. The way that this code is now drafted is it just says everything, it strikes the 35-foot, and so now it brings the planter boxes, which at the Planning Commission, our understanding were not subject to the setback so that they could be in this area. It now brings them into that piece. So I think from our perspective, the planters were never something subject to the setbacks. And it's important to note that we're not asking that these planters go above the 35-foot parapet. We're just asking them to be able to be in that interstitial space.
Thank you.
So is there some additional drafting maybe that might not bind our code to that design, but allow for that design while
If I can comment, it was my understanding from the materials that were prepared by Mr. Grumbach that the rooftop play area could in fact be at 35 feet, which is the maximum building height. If you don't want it at 35 feet, then we should change the 35 feet in here to say that it has to be something lower than that so that there's room to put a parapet up to the Medina standard 35-foot building height. But that's a different issue than setting back the planter boxes, and it's a different issue from whether or not you want to allow the play area surface at 35 feet, which I always thought was the goal, but maybe, I mean, that's what was written in black and white here, but maybe.
That was
So
never my understanding of our goal.
We're still talking about 3 schools. This school might be 30, but the rule is 35 foot is the building code.
So, but I think Scott has a really good point, which is we're mixing ideas. The first point was, I will let you speak in just a moment, but the first point was Alex's revision to make sure that the planters and the screens would not be subject to the setback. Right?
Right. And that makes perfect sense in this design scenario where you've got parapets there.
If you were to build another one in another school and the play area is at 35 feet, you still need a parapet for safety. The parapet is going to extend beyond 35 feet, but our code says maximum 35. So where is that parapet going to be?
But it says,
they can't do it.
it says right here that they can, that no portion shall extend except stair, elevator, and security barriers, and that parapet is a security barrier.
No.
No.
It's a,
The
it's a
netting.
safety barrier? So that 5-foot thing that prevents that
Part of the
plant
building.
from going over is what?
This is part of the building. This is 35 feet. Cannot extend 35 feet. And this is how they allow you to do a penthouse, but the penthouse has to go back into the building. It cannot be at the very front. So you cannot exceed and be 50 feet. You can be 50 feet only on the back. But the parapet, you cannot move it all the way. You have to keep it at the very front.
I'm not talking about moving it over, I'm talking about the height at this point. I'm
Yeah.
talking 30, 35, and here it says security barriers go over 35.
Right.
Okay,
And-
so
and with-
my understanding, and I attended all the meetings, was that was never the intent. That the intent was we wanted to respect the existing 35-foot height limit for the majority of the building, but we would allow only those things that have to project up above, such as the elevator, which is required to be there, and the stair shaft, and the safety netting, which is going to be specifically a safety netting on the inside. The idea of the parapet is that it's a sound barrier that keeps the sound in. They have to meet the sound requirements, and if without that barrier, I don't know how they could meet the sound requirements. Where'd he go? Did he
Well,
take
to
off?
Jessica's point, Scott, you could pretty easily draft something that said that the surface has to be at 30 feet.
Oh, absolutely. It's easy to solve this problem.
Right.
It's just, how do you want to solve it?
Right.
And it.
Yeah.
And would that
just
be
is a surprise
consistent
to
with
me.
Planning Commission?
In my mind, it would.
Yeah, okay. We're getting nods
But
all
I'm
around.
not the chairman anymore, so I can't speak.
He was nodding at the same time you were nodding.
We were trying to write it for the code, and the
Right.
code says 35 feet. Now, what would you do with safety? Could you have some other special safety mechanism that at the top of 35 feet? This is what we hope for. We would like, I wanted the 30. We didn't get it written in. We're working on so many pieces, again, because we didn't know, we had to invent it as we went. Because we did have a failed program, we just started over from scratch. So, yes, we'd like to see you just write it in at 30.
What? Yeah, 30.
The level of top of the playground.
Oh, the play surface.
And it's rooftop play.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And that,
It's the elegant solution.
what they're building, it's just a picture.
Yeah.
Okay, are we consensus on their council?
I think so.
Okay. So, will you make that change?
So I'm discerning that the motion maker and the second would amend their previous
So we
motion
will
to
add
include a fifth
item,
item.
which specifies that the play area is at 30 feet.
Is that 30, no higher than 30 feet?
No higher than 30 feet.
Got it.
And the parapet no higher than 35.
Correct, okay.
That's part of
Is
the
there-
same
is
motion
there a
that's
second for
already
that?
on the floor.
Yes.
Yeah. So now we have the same with 5 amendments.
Scott, do I need a second for that?
No, because I think Alex and his second just agreed to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Okay, so it's now
Thanks
part
for
of the
keeping me
original
on track.
motion.
Okay.
yes. Yeah,
So
okay.
now we start discussion.
Okay. So are there other instructions that we want to give to city staff on this? Should we go through in order?
It's your meeting, Madam Mayor.
Do you want to go through in order?
You want to order council or order page by page?
Let's go order page by page and see if anybody has any comments. I'm in the staff edited final recommendation. Assuming no changes on page 1, assuming no pages on change 2.
I actually have a question on the setbacks for schools in Medina. Is that where we're up to? No,
Setbacks is
Oh, the agenda
on
bill?
page
Yeah.
70.
So,
Are we looking at the red line? We should be looking at the red
I'm
line.
just looking at
Yes.
this, and I'm sure that the language is in there about 150 feet. I just don't know what that would look like for the other schools. What the 150 feet from all property lines adjoining a public street, what, or residential use, and what would that look like? Like, where would that put a rooftop playground on the other two schools?
So there were some diagrams that Planning Commission had. Is it possible to bring those back to council so we would know what that looks like?
Can you switch over to HTML? Thanks, Amy. So, Robert had several diagrams prepared that were part of, sorry, this side.
Here's what the red elementary. This will explain a lot of it.
Yeah, so this is what some different setback alternatives would look like. When Robert had these made, he wanted to consider 100 feet, 150 feet, and 200 feet. So the 100-foot setback is the green, purple adds another 50 feet, and then the orange adds another 50 feet for a total of 200 feet.
So to make sure that we all can visualize this, I'd suggest that we have them bring back, based on their proposal, something we can look at.
Yeah.
Would that address your concern?
I think that would be helpful. Thank
Okay. Could you do that for us?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I'm on page 68. Any changes in 68? I'm assuming none, but. Page 69, at the bottom, we took out vegetation planter boxes, or at least that's the discussion. Page 70. Staff is gonna get back to us with maps that show us what that looks like.
Vegetation planter boxes on the fourth line on the top. Under H.
Yes, thank you. So there's a, do you want to amend your proposal for that as well?
Yeah, I mean, I meant the two, whatever it says, vegetation planter boxes in that same,
You got that, Amy? Okay, thank you.
so you have two locations for that, G and H.
Alex, would you like your motion to incorporate the setbacks subject to the map review, subject to the review of the visuals?
What does it mean?
What
do
it
you
means
plan
is
to
it
do?
would say that the setback has to be as proposed by the city staff, which is at least 60 feet from rear property lines, at least 75 feet from side property lines, and at least 150 feet from all property lines adjoining a public street or residential use.
But that was the case, isn't it?
That's not how,
That was the one that was missing?
it was missing.
Okay, so we want to move it from the planning commission version to the staff edited version.
We want to move it from the staff memo into the
Okay, from the
staff
staff
edited
memo.
version.
Yeah.
Do you still want
Okay,
to see the
Scott?
setback designs when we bring
Yes.
it back?
Yeah, we want to see
Okay,
the
and then
designs.
meanwhile, you want the analysis that Christina did, that's in the staff report, to be incorporated into the revised.
Yeah, so the staff recommendation would be the at least 60 feet from rear property lines, 75 feet from side, 150 feet from all property lines adjoining a public street, and then we liked her or residential use.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, we've got the hours, 8 to 6. Any other changes on that page? Hearing none, let's go to the next page. We've got Q deleted, at least that's the proposal. There's just a typo which you guys will catch. The next maximum structural coverage and impervious surface area, I think that should be B4, and I think minimum lot area should be B5.
Right. We'll clean up the numbering when we do the final version.
Great.
Thank you for pointing that out.
And then page 72, we have the lighting of rooftop play areas is not allowed except for safety lighting, and you guys will work on the language for that.
Right. So alternative 2 with safety lighting allowed.
Right.
Correct. I think that's
That's it.
that's it. So are there other instructions that we'd like to give to staff while we're in discussion before we vote?
I would like to renew my question about the standards that are to be used by the director or by staff in evaluating impacts, and in particular in that section I,
L and M.
where we're discussing appropriate and sufficient mitigation. And I think there are several places actually throughout the law, so this is really more of a general question.
Happy to address that, and I was spending some time looking at the code earlier in the evening, and there are other portions of the code that go to that, so it'd be an easy matter, I think, to share that with you when we bring this back.
Yeah,
so
I
that
think
you
it's
have,
just an education question. What are the standards by which this is evaluated and?
chance to see if we think they are complete for this purpose.
Correct.
Okay, David, did you have something?
Just being good neighbors, I know that a lot of information was sent out to people 500 feet away from St. Thomas and the other residents. Just wanted to see, specifically, we're fine from a Medina standpoint. I was just curious to see if we reached out to any of the Clyde Hill residents that were within the 500 feet and if we had heard from them at all.
If they were within the 500 feet, they were notified. I'm not sure, just off the top of my head, how far across 84th 500 feet would go. Because we draw the circle and, you know, if they happen to be outside the city limits and they happen to be outside the city limits.
And I do know that Robert sent an email to Citywide.
Yeah, I mean, we can come back and give you a list, but we really did make, you know, kind of above and beyond effort to notify folks.
Okay, great. But I think just as a courtesy, just to make sure that George and then the residents of Hunts Point, if they're appropriate.
Sure. No, that makes sense.
And that was
Great.
for all the schools, right?
Excuse me?
That was for all the schools, right? Because the code amendment would.
It went citywide. It went to everybody in the city.
500-foot notice. Did we do a 500-foot notice, or did we just do a citywide email?
You're only outside of Medina area, would be that Clyde Hill area, everything else would be Medina.
Right, but if we did a 500-foot notice and we only did it for St. Thomas 500 feet, and we're talking about code amendments that apply to 3 schools,
Off the top of my head, I do not know the answer to your question, but I can certainly find out and get back to you.
Didn't you say you sent a citywide email?
Yeah, we did.
A mailer.
I mean, you know, we did send it out citywide for the open house. Is that what you're referring to, or are you referring to a different kind of notice?
actually, I was just following on David's question because he had asked about the 500 feet. And so my question was 500 feet of what, basically?
I think 500 feet is an application.
My guess is 500 feet of the application, but before I chisel that in stone, let me make sure I know the answer, because I don't.
And so then,
But there hasn't been an application yet, so I think we're stepping ahead. I think the notice of 500 feet would come into effect once their application comes in. Right now, it went citywide, which gave everybody notice.
There was a series of notifications, let's put it that way.
Okay.
Different events.
All right, are we ready to vote on Alex's motion that we ask staff to come back with a code amendment, revised code amendment as per our discussion? Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. Thank you very much.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
May I suggest that if you wish to take additional public testimony at your next regular council meeting, which is July 9th, that you could continue this hearing to July 9th, at which point we would bring back the revised ordinance for consideration, and you could take additional testimony if that was the council's wish, without having to republish notice.
I think that's a good recommendation.
Are we getting, though, an ordinance ready by July 9th? The complete language that we could vote on, right?
Yes, yes.
Yes, so then the hearing is continued until July 9th. Thank you.
Mike, when do you recommend, when do you anticipate getting the revised code available for the council and for the public that we could review?
That's really a question more for the city attorney who's actually going to have to draft it. Are you suggesting that we may not have time to,
No, I like the idea of public hearing, but I think in terms of what we've had before is we want to make sure that there is one final document that is available for everyone at least several days before, so people can review it.
Okay. I've just been told about a week to 10 days.
Okay, that'd be fantastic. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, everyone. We're going to move on to the next question for council. Do you want to go over the garbage cans code? I think it should be quick.
I'd
Okay.
like to make a motion to move it.
I can be very quick and just say that City staff tried to find the middle ground between being the garbage police and having codes similar to other cities that say you must have your garbage can back into your garage or your backyard within 24 hours, because that's simply not workable for a lot of houses in Medina that have 100-foot-long driveways. So we've crafted a code that says you have to remove it from the right-of-way within that 24-hour period, and we kind of leave it to the neighbors along some of those long driveways to have multiple houses feeding into them to work it out amongst themselves.
Okay, and Alex, you had one refinement that you offered.
I wanted to propose that we also notify residents not to keep garbage, plain garbage, not recycle or yard waste inside bags, like plastic bags, the black or the white plastic bags, because the rodents and the raccoons and the crows are very good at puncturing these. I sent you a couple of pictures where Ryan had to send his people early in the morning to clean the street because the dirt was in the middle of the street. So if we can add something like this, and I'm thinking enforcement will be based on complaints. You know, we're not asking you to be sending people to notify that. But the reason I'm saying that, because over the last 2 months, I've seen it happening many times on Evergreen Point, where there is certain 11 cans always sitting there 24/7. They don't move into the house. And sometimes they have bags next to the cans as well.
And the city attorney sent out some potential language for that to you, and we can include that in a final ordinance for your approval at your next meeting. The only caveat I add to that is, if you look at the literature that's put out by our friends at Republic Services, they do tell people that, hey, if you can't get all your recyclings into your garbage can, put it in a plastic bag and set it next to the can.
But recycle, which is okay, because you know,
well,
if you have a TV box, a huge one, you cannot put it in the can, so you could put it next to it. But I'm talking about plain garbage.
Right.
They do allow you to have one extra bag.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think we should include it in the code, but understand that, like I said, we are battling a little bit of, people are going to get some mixed messages.
So we can be efficient and just have a motion to adopt the code as proposed by staff with the addition of the attorney's recommendation under Clause E, which is all garbage shall be placed in and contained within a bin. So if there's a motion.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
I can't vote for it to need to be in a bin when our provider doesn't require it to be in a bin.
Okay. Any other discussion?
Because then every Christmas and, those time of the years, we're going to have so many complaints, and then all Steve and team are going to do is go and deal with garbage.
Any other discussion? Okay. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Was that unanimous, or was it with an abstention?
Well, I think there were some people who were silent, and I think if you're silent, what are you deemed to? Let me get my.
Abstain.
Well, you
What?
have to vote yes or no.
Yeah.
I need
They
to
would be
hear.
classified as an abstention, so it would be 6-4, nobody against, 1 abstention.
Okay, let's go by roll call. Ms. Wen?
Yes.
Mr. Lee?
Yay.
Mr.
Yes.
Marcos? Aye.
Sure.
Yes.
It was
Thank you.
unanimous. My ears are bad. Who made the second? I'm sorry to ask.
When?
Ms. Wen?
When?
Thank you.
All right, time for an executive decision, Mr. Sauerwein. You want to go through the city manager's report, or do you want to postpone it?
You have all of the department directors' reports included in your packet. Let me just say one quick thing on the city manager's report involving the Bellevue Boys and Girls Club. I did speak with them a couple of times over the last 2-3 weeks, and what I've been told is that the Bellevue Boys and Girls Club does not give Bellevue citizens a discount. The city of Bellevue gives them a discount, not the Boys and Girls Club. Now, that explanation, I think, generates more questions than it does answers. So I've asked the folks from the Boys and Girls Club to come to either your July or your August meeting and talk with you directly, rather than me trying to play interpreter.
Thank you. Okay, thank
That
you.
would conclude my report.
And before we adjourn, if there's no objection, what we moved to section 7.2 was the emeritus position. And if there's no objection, we could pass that with the revision that except for optional emeritus member, all members of the Parks and Rec Board must reside within the city limits of Medina. Ms. Kellerman has the text. Is there any objection?
No objection.
Okay, by consensus, it carries.
Great.
Any comments from the public?
The only comment I'd make is, times are interesting these days. Costs continue to go up, revenues continue to go down. We're in a very similar situation as yourself. I think there are many levers to pull and push on, and there is no silver bullet at the end of the day that is the right answer to solve the problem going forward. Costs are going up, at least for our town. 85% of our budget is police, fire, and staff. That is the brunt of our budget. And there's no whittling down of those costs at the end of the day. And our state, like the conversation earlier, when you're trying to go comparatively to other states, our state's made a decision that we're going to tax real estate, but we're not going to have an income tax. And then we have the Hyman initiative that caps cities at 1%. And so we're kind of, it's tough. And like I said, I'm interested to hear what you guys come up with as a solution going forward. I don't know that asking our residents to tax themselves more is the right idea, but there's probably a sweet spot in there at the end of the day. And so I'd commit the town funds point to working with you guys on how we come up with a reasonable solution going forward, because costs seem to not be slowing down. So anyways, thank you for everything that you guys do. I know what you go through, and it's 10:30 at night, so thank you very much for the service you provide.
Thanks, Mercedes. And so before we conclude, I'd just like to say thank you to everybody. We had a really detailed conversation. Everybody participated and everybody stayed civil and focused on the issues. And I'd just like to tell everyone, great job. So thanks for sticking with us to the end. And if there's no objection, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.